Right, this is going to be the first episode of the relaunch of Counterpoints. And at the beginning of the show, I have to really quickly do some house cleaning, which is, if someone like thinks they're an old school fan, but they're not old school enough, they're actually going to make a mistake and go, what the hell? This show's supposed to be Thorin and Moses. Like, they were the duo, which in a way you are technically correct. Like, I did actually do it for quite a while with Moses in, like, I'm going to say like 2016 to whatever that year, because I know it was the year I did E-League with him. But what people don't know is the actual concept of doing a show called Counterpoints came along years before that. And basically, it was actually when CSGO just began and there wasn't very much media. And what I did was, at the time, I worked for actually a big website. This is before I was independent, called On Gamers, which if people don't know was kind of like what ESPN Esports was. It was one of these big like media sites, came in with money and hired a bunch of big like content creators, and then we all did like different stuff. And so I was doing a bit of CSGO stuff, and I realized, first of all, it's just a banger name for a talk show, Counter-Strike, isn't it? Like, it's a pretty on point name. But then more importantly, at the time, actually, it wasn't the meta for podcasts that you had like, you know, like a couple of friends or two hosts or whatever. Sometimes that you would have shows, like I'm just an interviewer. So back then, the point of this show was more just like Thorin plus X number of guests. And I would just bring, like, I think one of the first ones was like NBK and someone. The joke is, a random piece of trivia for people. Even though Device has actually never featured on my channel, aside from that ident he did about choking, he actually was on an episode of Counterpoints at the beginning, and it's the only video I've ever lost. So, you know, in some mad way, it was cursed that I was just never ever allowed to have Device on my show, because that's the only video ever that I've lost, Maniac, where like I actually, you know, like in the video recording, like it crashed in like whatever, OBS or whatever, and this is before you could like change the file type or whatever, and whatever it was originally, that basically made it back then, so that like, it's not because I'm a boomer, guys, I even looked into this, it's not that like, you know, there was a way you could extract it, like it actually did like corrupt the file or something, 'cause it like crashed the whole PC or something. So later it turned out if you change the file type, there is a way you can make it so like the content, without going too nerdy, the container can always be accessed, it isn't corrupted or whatever. You see, I've learned my lesson, is the point here, Maniac. And then secondly, this is why the thing about that one, my beloved Device, never ever to feature on the channel. Now, you might come on one day, guys, don't worry about that. The real problem is I've had like a personal one-man war against Astralis for like, that's 5 years. I'm not like, that's a bit more, you know, relevant than an old file. But basically, all you need to know is this: there's a reason why I've never lost a file since, and that's because I religiously, even in the modern day, as Maniac himself can actually attest, always do a test. You always do a test of your equipment before you start recording. Doesn't matter how many episodes you recorded, you always do it. So anyway, to bring it all back, basically, the point is, look, I obviously enjoy Moses' company a lot, and I've done a lot of talk shows with him and a lot of different content. But in the modern day, I can bring it back with whoever I want. So I thought what we would do is, and if you don't know, my style in all my content is I sort of break the fourth wall a bit, maybe. I can just let people know what I'm doing, basically, because I just think it's like, just makes more, sets people's expectations. They get more of an idea. And spoiler, for some reason, even though I just constantly tell everyone exactly what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, why, like super long articles, I still remain some mysterious enigma with like, he's just saying crazy stuff. And what does he even mean? It's like, mate, nobody's done like my whole career has been like, please, I've done like 7,000 videos explaining it, and they're just like, it's just saying crazy shit that no one understands. So I know that's my life anyway. So I thought at the beginning to bring you in now, Maniac, the idea for doing this show, because I didn't necessarily explain this part to you, is I actually think the reason why the old one with Moses worked as like a unique flavour is because normally with my style, people would want it to be me plus someone spicy. Like, you notice my modern shows, I sort of play into the hot take angle, or I get the people who are going to give you like Maui Snake, going to give you their own like super spicy angle, or like call someone overrated. But I actually also think, like classic fucking body cop movies, the other angle you can go with is just contrast. So I actually think we have like a very interesting contrast in that sense. Like, obviously, I'm coming from my side. What people don't know is this, minute, so I would actually bring you in, is this is where everyone does get reduced and labelled, mate, because I think people actually go way too far the other way with you. They actually make it sound like you're just boring, or you like never ever have your own take. How would you define yourself in this sense? Because to me, I'm guessing you think of it more as like you're maybe more even keeled. You don't. It's not like you have boring takes, but it's just you're not coming in with the harshest crazy angle, right?
No, I think it's a fair point. I also think there is a first impression kind of process at it, which is when I started doing this work, I was way milder and I took way less risks and I was way more careful with what I was saying. And I think a lot of people stuck to that idea. I do think I worked my way into being way more outspoken and way more emotional and clear with whatever it is that I actually think is true. But I try to keep a line where I don't manufacture hot takes. Either there is something that really bothers me and I'm going to go all in on it, or I'm trying to be measured and, you know, then I will be, I think if you say, how would I define myself? Be more like classy, I guess, in a way, like, you know, classy type stuff. I have always made it my point to not need controversy to remain relevant. That is my main point, because I think unless you have an incredible capacity to produce content and be relevant for a long time, I think it's exhausting. It's like a sprint. So I can have a controversy here and there. Everybody knows they can bait me in a side with debate here and there, and I'll get my fair share, of course. You know, it's fair. But other than that, I try to have a line that I follow, which allows me to just cruise control, have good, like, high quality content, intellectual honesty, and then every now and then I'll get excited about stuff. But yeah, I don't manufacture it. But I do think that some people are stuck with an old image of me, which isn't true anymore.
Oh no! By the way, I'll just tease people, because in the future we will do some content on the ZWoo topic. We'll just wait until we establish it, the right times, the windows, then we'll go into all that. But what I actually think people have noticed, or not noticed rather, dude, this just shows how people just miss everything. If it's not like spoon fed to them, they can't process what they're seeing. The reason why you might have saw I even retweeted your take is when Maniac, like everyone in the French speaking scene, got completely baited over that whole ZWoo topic. Which, by the way, I've leveled my game up, if people notice. I don't get I don't read all the replies now, Maniac. So I don't get like triggered like I used to. I get to be the like little trickster figure, like just those little like some kind of cartoon character from your Warner Brothers, like put a little Acme bomb, and then I just run around the corner and press the thing, and I don't get sucked into it now. I get to like watch like, oh, I did that lol. And so basically, if people don't know, when that whole drama bomb went off, which was amazing, it worked fucking totally awesome. The most interesting angle was from Maniac, believe it or not. Maniac not only went fully in on the topic, but here's the big teaser that's going to make you all like, what? Maniac? He did. Normally, Maniac's take would be like, well, you know, what can we do? We can only do what they have done. We have to give them a chance. Like, give him a few years, man. He is just young. Like, he didn't even do that. Maniac didn't even do that. He went the other way. He actually went all in, and he did a tweet where he said that, I meant when CS2's finished, he said that ZWoo will win every single individual acclaim or record possible. He basically, Maniac just said, like, he will be the GOAT. Essentially, if the game just continues, like CS2 or whatever, he will be now, that's pretty bold if people don't know. Like, that's actually basically almost the boldest take you can have, especially as, and this is why I think people don't get how spicy that take is. He hasn't done those things yet. Like, essentially, Maniac saying he's going to win like a bunch more majors, MVPs, top one. So I thought that was pretty cool. Like, I know it was a bit out of nowhere that you were bold in that way, but that was essentially the one time you sort of decided I'm gonna go all in on this take, right?
Yeah, I mean, I even thought at the time it wasn't that crazy. It's just I'm basing my take on what I have seen in the last few years, and I fully understand that there are some other candidates who have a much stronger referee of the last few years. There's no debate on that. I'm never gonna stand here and say, well, actually, I was the GOAT right now, because I think it would be an idiotic take. But I do think, based on what I have seen, and if I believe in how reliable this is in the next few years, then yes, I think there's going to be a point in time where he is going to be the greatest of that period that has now expanded. That I believe firmly, and that's why I made that tweet.
So there you go. See, every now and then you've got to keep your eye out for him. But if you know the context,
exactly. If people get used to this, Thorin, that's a problem. If people get used to spicy takes, you know, it's like your palate gets used to it. Like your body's always looking for balance. If you're fucking shouting for wolves all the time, no one is going to believe you. So I try to keep it cool. Yes. And every now and then I'll drop a real one, and then I'll go back to be quiet so that people actually pay attention.
Indeed. Also, by the way, one other thing on this topic as well that I've got to say is, whenever you come with an angle, right, this is another thing. When people are trying to define you, I think another mistake they make is, because initially that the door you came into analysis from was like, I was an ex-pro, right? Well, because everyone did that, by the way. Everyone except me and then Maui, which is why Maui's sort of going my angle, if you notice. Everyone was an ex-pro who does this job. I actually think that's a part that's really misunderstood about how good you are at your gig and some of the other people who do the casting. For me, it's not the fact that you're ex-pros, because I say you're all ex-pros. Like, there's like a million people who could come on desks who used to be famous players. And if you notice, one thing that people do that I think is a bit cruel is, I'll give you a very brief analogy. You know that thing that used to be a big trend trend a few years ago where they would, for real, they would find someone who was like, I'm actually just an honest person, I'll just say it, kind of like a bit of a social loser. Like they're a streamer, but maybe they have like, I don't know, some strange disability, or they're just nobody. You know, there's a guy that has like 20 viewers. There was a weird trend that came along where people would find something like that on Twitch, and it would be like, they thought they were in a movie in America, something Maniac. They would be like, oh my goodness, we have to get this person acclaimed because he is nobody. And like what they think is like a Hollywood movie, they would all for like a few days find this person's stream, promote it, be like, wow, look. And then they'd have all videos on like live stream fails of the person like crying like, oh my God, what the hell, I've got 100 subs. And you know, in a way you were getting into it, you're watching like, oh my God, like his life's changing. But the reason why it was really dark, Maniac, is I think you know where this story's going if you've been on the internet. After like a week, this would be happening to this person for a week. They'd be getting like subs, people watching. But you can imagine after like a week, everyone was like, well, I'm bored of that now. So they just go back to the other thing. And then we just leave that person and they're just like dead in the water. Like, what
That's
the hell?
horrible.
Well, the thing they do to pros like that is, you'll have heard this, every pro that is thinking of retiring, because initially for the little PR, you'll get like an invite to like a DreamHack or something back in the day. Like, come on the desk. Wow, the former major winner on the desk. And everyone gets that first offer, right? And it's so cruel, bro, because it makes all these ex-pros go, oh, I'll just have a job like Thorin and them on the desk. It's like, you won't, mate, because one, like, everyone there's an ex-pro, so you're competing against, like, they're all got the same qualification in that sense. You have to actually be good at the job now, mate. And then secondly, most people, it's just the novelty. It's just cool it's just cool that some super, like, former great in-game leaders there for a week. Like, wow, but actually, once you have them, like, for 5 events, you're going to go, actually, he's not that great. So what's funny, what people don't know is, the reason I actually even told you before you even retired from doing the coaching with Envious, the reason I told you would actually be good on the desk is actually for a very different reason, which is people think you're just nice, right? But it's not true. Maniac actually just genuinely, this will sound weird, genuinely just tries to be honest, but he just does it in his own way. He's got his own way of phrasing it. So I'll give you a very quick example. There's a concept that's very misunderstood in journalism and my field actually, which is fans in the modern day have this weird view of what they think objectivity is for a journalist, right? They think objectivity means this silly thing that basically Fox News in America invented, where it's like, right, objectivity, Maniac, is like, I give my biased side and then you give your biased side and then everyone's got all the biased sides so they can decide, right? And it's like, no, that's subjectivity, bro. And what they don't know is objectivity is the idea that, like, if you were a real journalist investigating it, even if you didn't like what you found, even if it went against everything you believed in, objectivity is the idea that you believe it objectively exists as a separate thing and you would report it. So basically, to me, I've always thought you were more in that vein. Like, if people don't know, it's why I told people years ago, if he ever wants to, the guy who would kill analysis is Carrigan, because he's also got that vibe as well. Like, he can be a tiny bit spicy, but people don't get it. He's just a mega reflective guy. Like, he's a guy where I feel like all of his strong takes are well thought out, and he doesn't come in. If you notice, he doesn't really put a foot wrong in media. That's it. I think those are the people I want to be analysts, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the point you make about objectivity is so important nowadays. It is so important because I come across it on social media, on Twitter, on whatever forums and all the time. Like, people mistake an opinion for an objectivity. They mistake all the time. They say, well, I try to be objective. I don't like this player. I'm like, no, this is the definition of an opinion. What you've done is subjective. That's different. Like, I think probably for me, it comes from like the studies I've had, like all the academics, and when you do questionnaires and analysis and data and all, like you get a sense of respect for what is actually objective in the numbers and the data that you have, and then whatever you decide to do with it then becomes subjective. But there is such thing as a fact. Like, for example, for the love I have for ZywOo, I can't go on a stat and say, well, actually, he has 2.2 rating at every grand final. No, I cannot do that. There is an objective data out there. I can question how the data is made. I can say, well, I don't think the rating is the right whatever. I can do that. But I cannot say that, oh, ZywOo is actually much better in the grand finals. No, there isn't objective data for it. So I think it's some of the thing that I try to do at the desk the whole time, and I've made a tweet about it, and I was very open. It's okay to be subjective at times at the desk. I think it brings flavor. It's great. You have players you like, you have players that dislike, players that annoy you, teams that annoy you. Just be aware that it's a goddamn subjective opinion that you're putting out there. Don't mistake your opinion for truth and fact, because that becomes a problem. And this is where people can't argue. I don't think people want to debate anymore. No. People just want to obliterate other people with their opinion, and they're not even listening at all. And that is something that I think is a problem, and it's something that I try to bring at the desk. Acknowledge the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, and then, bring some flavor. Yeah, be excited. It's a game. You're supposed to be excited. That's great. That's part of it.
By the way, don't worry, we will jump into a bunch of actual CS stuff, talk about all the gamers out. But I do have a question before we start, though, and this is what you call loaded questions, and I'm just serving it up here for you to do a 360 slam dunk, basically. But the reason why I always found it funny that people would think, this is where I'm a very different person from how people perceive me as. People would think I would be really insecure that I wasn't a former pro, that I do this gig, right? But the joke is, I actually think that's like one of my saving graces, mate, because since I wasn't ever a pro player, it doesn't work on me when people do that classic take of like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, I don't care, mate. Like, yeah, you're in a way, you're right. Because if you don't know, fans, the reason I actually do analysis is because for 10 years, it was about 10 years, I would be sat at home watching the same game. And you don't think a million times I ever thought like, I'd make a way more interesting point there, or what are they talking about? That's not what's going on. And I just thought, give me the mic, let me have a go, basically. But what I've always wondered in your case was, the person I see this the worst with, it used to be Pimp, but it's now Cassad. If people don't know, the reason why I made that video a few months back, where I talked about how good all the analysis and talent were as pro players, is because, dude, it's so whack. Like, I don't care that people say you know what you're talking about, because they're going to say that anyway, because I wasn't a former pro maniac. But when I look at like who we have, like if people don't know, Pimp was like a borderline HLTV top 20 player. I think he might even have been that year. I can't remember, but he was like right. I think he maybe didn't make it, but he would have been right on the line if people don't know. Lurpis was like in fucking like major semi-finals and stuff. Obviously, you played in the major semi-final. The maddest one to me is the Cassad one. Like, Cassad took, for real, a lineup that looks like it's in a feel-good American movie, the fucking Australian Renegades team, and took them to the semis of a major. Like, to me, these are fucking bonkers accomplishments, mate. But what I was going to get to is this. In the modern day, there's some sort of weird quantum superstate fans treat former pros in, which is, look, if they tomorrow retired and Simple and Carrigan came on the desk, I've no doubt they would get respect for their resumes and all this stuff. But for some reason, all the names I've listed, it's like if you actually become an analyst, whatever you've done gets deleted. Like, I wondered in your case, how do you handle that? Because people do the same to everyone. I mean, people might even have seen, won't say who. There's even pro players have done it recently, where they just try and apply everyone on the desk like an idiot or a noob or a casual or something, right?
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think whenever a pro, like an actual pro, joins the desk for like a guest interview and all, people have this contrasting effect where they paint him as like the actual expert of the game. Yes. They say, oh, nobody else knows the shit they're talking about at the desk. I think it's a very loaded question, but let's just address it quickly. In terms of like first-hand experience of the current details of the meta, I might be a little bit behind. And I don't pretend like I am. I don't pretend like I am the actual expert of every single details of Counter-Strike and how it's been played. But what I do think is that the experience that you have when you're a former professional and you've been at it for many years like I did, and you've traveled, and you can actually empathize with their experience. What is it to be a professional player? What is it to play at a major, in a playoff of a major, play of a stage? I've done all of these things. That it doesn't matter that it could have been 5 years ago. I know Katowice, I know Spodek, I've been there, I know a major, I've done there. So that gives me a little bit of legitimacy. But what I think really matters, honestly, more than anything, is how you deliver your content on the desk. And that has nothing to do with how much of a professional player you were. I don't think it has at all. I think this is where the cutoff begins. This is where the filter begins for an old player that comes to the desk and then time after time after time actually decides to really work on his craft, on how to deliver points, how to make it intelligible and engaging for people to understand what it is you're talking about. And this is where I have personally learned a whole lot from you and your storytelling at this. Like, how do you present characters, where they've been, what kind of journey are they on, what is the history between two teams, why is it interesting, what kind of stylistic approach is there? That in itself has nothing to do with the professional career. Like, it's a whole craft. It's a different craft. So from my position, my professional career gave me a free pass to get opportunities. I got a whole lot of opportunities because of who I was, former professional player. And then because I fell in love with the craft, I stayed. And I think the success that I have now as an analyst has fuck all to do with my professional years. I think I'm way past it. I've already used that sort of legitimacy I had. And now I'm still here because I've became a good storyteller and I've become engaging. And I think this is where it matters. So yeah, being an ex-professional player and having an understanding of the game is great. It gets you in and it makes you say relevant things about the game, which is great. But beyond that, you have to be able to deliver it and you have to be able to become. That's why we call it broadcast talent. We're broadcast talent. And that in itself is different than just being an ex-professional player. In my case, it helped, but it's not why I'm here 5 years later.
All I'm saying is, if I were you, Maniac, I would be on some like Thierry Henry shit. I would just run up with some HooXi type character and be like, "Motherfucker, I was in the semi-final of a major. You let me know when you do that. I'd be if think how bad I am now. In some ways, it's like the premise is like this is how God humbled me, Maniac. If I actually was a former pro, I'd be totally intolerant on the desk. Like
you're already
I know exactly. This is the only way to make it reasonable. Like it's the only way. Like the joke is, I don't even know if this is true, but there's a famous joke. Like, I remember it was in a Ricky Gervais stand-up about like the daddy long legs. I don't know if you know what the insect is. It's the one that's a spider, but it has really long legs. It's like a really weird one you see in like toilets and stuff. Basically, that little creature, supposedly there's a really weird piece of trivia that it has like some poison that's really potent, but it just doesn't have like proper teeth, so it can't administer it. And so the joke Ricky Gervais makes is that like, it must originally have had teeth and then it was just biting everything and killing it. So then God was like, right, give me them back. Like, like you've got to control that. So that's it, like the analogy for me. By the way, it's spoiler. For people who don't know, if you've never seen my podcast before, which is impossible, but let's pretend that artifice could be a thing. Obviously, it's all diversions, isn't it? I'm not the guy like, well, sorry to do a tangent there. They're all tangents. So what makes the shows good is you just talk about whatever's interesting in the moment and whatever sort of comes to you, And so there'll be a loose structure. So spoiler, watch how I do this. This is going to seem like a segue, but actually it's a very cynically engineered angle, Maniac. So don't you guys hate it when your favourite analysts hit the wrong hot take and just irritate you and leave you feeling like, I wanted some delicious hot takes, but that one's really hit me badly. Much like when that hot, irritating cannabis smoke gets in your throat and you think, you know what, I do enjoy smoking weed, but this is the least enjoyable part of it. Harsh, irritating, unwanted, quite frankly, kind of like pimp, really, in some way. Well, not for me. I'm not saying that. I'm just reading copy out right here. Whoever wrote this, that's a disgraceful implication to make about a trusted colleague and friend. But don't you wish that these analysts, whoever they are, bloody analysts making hot takes, don't you wish they would just let their takes chill for an hour? Think about it, come back even-headed and even-keeled and just present it in a more palatable manner. Mitch, like, if you like to smoke cannabis, you can get the freeze pipe, which has a food-safe glycerin chamber that you just put into the freezer section for a mere 1 hour. So just about enough time to watch an hour of Na'vi, any version of them ever, play Counter-Strike, if you're lucky. It's probably overtime at that point in time. And after the overtime, you take the food-safe glycerin chamber out. And now when you smoke weed through it, it cools the smoke by over 200 degrees. So all of a sudden, instead of pimp, that's like the maniac of smoking cannabis at that point. Because, he goes away, thinks about it, lets it go down, and suddenly it's just smooth and enjoyable as a take, even though it's got all the same chemicals in there that get you where you want to get high on Counter-Strike in this analogy, right? So if you like that idea, or, spoiler, you can ignore all that if you want about pimp a minute. Do you just like to smoke cannabis? Do you want it to be cooler and not irritate your throat? If so, get a freeze pipe from thefreezepipe.com using code LFN for 10% off. There you go. By the way, shout outs and apologies and, just general hi to Pimp. He's not in any way associated with the ad read. He's not getting any money for it. But
I don't know how he got in that conversation.
Doesn't matter. Here's the thing. In some ways, this is the thing. I'll spin it this way. In some ways, he's winning with his branding. I'm even referencing him. We have to all talk about him. So got to give him that, haven't we? By the way, that also does show, as a quick aside before we get into the actual IEM Cologne, that does show how, like you said about first impressions, when you set the first impression, in some ways it's never fully shattered for some fans. Because, dude, in the modern day, if people don't know, especially on Twitter, Pimp does the opposite of that, guys. He doesn't try to be super harsh with the hot takes. But the joke is, because he did do that a few years ago, especially on Blast, like, people still do talk like he's coming. Like, the joke is, he has the rep that actually Maui probably does deserve now, where Maui is trying to get those, he is trying to, like, farm those angles. He is trying to, like, stoke a bit of controversy. Whereas actually Pimp, he's been pretty chill for a few years now. I think he's sort of, like, leveled off. He's normalized, as you say, right?
I think this is the issue. The issue that we had at some point, that I had with Jacob at some point, and we even talked about it, is just like, not everything can be the most. Not everything can be the best.
That's true.
The most, all of the super.
Was everything a goat? Yeah,
at some point, we're going to run out of adjectives, right? Like,
true.
We have to bring in some measure. Like, you can say he was great. You don't have to say he's the best, and you can say he was struggling. You don't have to say he's the worst player of all time. So I think he reeled it in a little bit. But you're right. Some people just still hold him to that same, like, very first few events he's done, a few whatever months or years where he was very, very like harsh and extreme and direct in his takes. Yeah, I guess you're right. Like, first impression, they're really hard to change. It's a whole process.
Right, let's get into some of the actual recent stuff. So if people don't know, at the moment, I don't have like a set vision of what we'll do with this show. We can do a bunch of things. It can be like a regular show of just what the news can be, the grist for the mill of what's going on. Or, like we said about the Zero topic, I thought the other angle would be, when a big topic like that happens, the other problem is you don't have like a platform to set these things up. So the idea would be we would just go and get like a guest who's relevant and we'll bring them on and we'll do the big things. So let's just talk a bit about some of the Cologne angles. So here's the thing. In general, when an event's happen, I like to just start with the winner and go backwards. So let's just start there. Right. On the G2 angle, Maniac, I'll ask you the obvious topic that surely is the other thing aside from the Zero thing that everyone's been discussing for the last week. And it goes like this. How do you square the, square the circle, as it were, or resolve the equation of the HooXi factor? Because basically it's an obvious setup, isn't it? On the one hand, when you look at what G2 has done at the majors under him, it is nothing. Like, you can see why people like Casada are going crazy. At the same time, this is why I actually phrase it like it's not obvious. Like, it's not like there is an answer to this to me. At the same time, as I said on Twitter, and I don't take that back just because I don't like HooXi guys. Like, if you can win Cologne and Katowice in 1 year, well, spoiler, this is the third time ever it's been done. Like, that's really impressive. In a way, as a total accomplishment, I actually think that's better than a major because it's two massive tournaments and they're really hard and it does matter. So how does Maniac see this angle? How do you see specifically the HooXi angle? I mean, he has done something historic, even if he hasn't won the major. So how do you figure out? Like, does this mean he has to be good enough IGL for G2? Where do you place him in all this?
No, I think the first step is obviously acknowledging like what's happened this year, the whole Katowice and Cologne. Like, there's no way you can take that away from him. Like, that is an accomplishment for the roster, and that's ammunition for whoever's gunning for him or rather defending him. Now, my take on HooXi is the following: there are events where I have seen him be individually so bad that it becomes a liability, and it's not going to work at the top level. Period. Like, that's statement number one. There is a threshold under which you cannot fall, and if you do, it doesn't really matter if you have the best ideas in the universe. Counter-Strike at the high level, being as it is right now, is just not going to work. So there are some of these events, and they have happened, and when they do happen, that's it. That's a killer factor immediately for G2. Now, I will say, what he's done individually in Cologne was just good enough, individually, just good enough, to be able to be up to par, have a couple of trades here and there, be present in the server, not be like an easy picking on the CT side, not be like an easy target that people go against. He's done that. So that box checked for Cologne. I will also say that some of the calls he made in like key moments were actually both courageous and well thought out. Like, he's had moments where G2 was like 13-13, 14-14, and you got to call that B rush, and you got to realize if you're an IGL, if you're in the semifinal and you call that B rush round 29, and if you mess up, if you fuck up, that's on you. It's 100% on you. You called the wrong thing. So some of the calls that G2 made and some of the change of pace that they've made, I will attribute it to him. Although granted, I could be wrong. Could have been Nico, could have been Hunter, could have been JKS. For all I know, on the TeamSpeak say, listen, I think we should do this. We, as looking from the outside, we have to imagine that the leader actually has an actual say of whatever strategy is being used. So I think at key points, he had the right reads, and I think he got them out of some funky situations. These are the pluses. Now, on the minuses, or let's say the mitigating factors, when you have Hunter, m0NESY, and Nico who are gunning at 1.2 or 1.3 ratings, yes, that does fucking help to win titles. It's part of the equation too. Like, do I believe HooXi is a good leader enough to win Cologne if Nico, m0NESY, and Hunter are not playing like that? No, I don't think so. Because that's just how high the game is right now. That's how high level the game is. But I think with the pieces that he had in Cologne, he played individually to a decent level. He called well. He had key moments. Yeah, that was a great Cologne for him. Okay, the way I see it, there is not much difference between this HooXi winning Katowice Cologne in these two events isolated and the stretch that Carrigan had when he had this amazing few months where they won so much in 2022. That is the comparison. You can look at the numbers. They're very similar. The calling style, there's also a lot of similarities, and we know G2 and FaZe are sometimes mirroring how they play. I see a whole lot of similarities. So if you hate HooXi and you want him out, then just close your eyes and don't watch Cologne, because this was a good argument as to what he can do when his players are playing well and he's calling the right things.
Yeah, to me, this is actually one of those ones where, like, I've been describing it as, to me, he's the person where either I'm going to like use him as the exception that proves the rule, as you say in English, or maybe he's like the most extreme example of this. Because I have a general principle that goes like this. which is, since for IGL, we're always speculating to some degree, and even if you hear the calls, you don't even know what they always mean by it, and what they're like, how do they previously communicate? Do they have a shorthand for something? You'll never really know 100% what the IGL did. So since we're always speculating, a general rule I have goes like this: you can't be a bad in-game leader and win giant tournaments. I don't even think you can even do it and win one. I know there have been one-off like fluke wins in history, so I won't say it like totally, but as a general rule, like if you win a tournament, especially like a Cologne or a kind of ENCE, like you notice Maniac, we might have a lot of shocks in the major because of the format, but like when someone like Astralis does this Cologne run now, like there's a reason we give them all props. Like no one does go, who cares? Because you have to beat real teams to do it. Like generally, the big Katowices and Colognes do have amazing teams making it deep down there. If you make top 4, you've done something big there. So I don't actually think you can do that and actually suck. Like if we picked out, I don't know who it would be, because to be fair, there's not a lot of in-game leaders people meme on, but if you pick out whoever people think the worst in-game leader is, I don't think they could even with this lineup. Even if you gave them Monacy and Nico a Jig, somehow basically essentially whatever they bring to the table would fuck it up. Like if the analogy was that the IGL in this case, because we're talking about an example of a team that is like a sort of a super team, it's all amazing ingredients, the analogy here would be that a bad in-game leader would be like a bad yeast that just fucks up the bread and makes it all really, and makes it less than the sum of its parts. So essentially, I don't think HooXi can actually be bad at his job. Like, if I look at it, my biggest problem, there's 2 main angles I have on this one, go like this. One, the problem is his job isn't the same set of expectations as Nico's job. And that's actually a narrative clash that we're having in this discussion, because I actually think the Kassad angle's not even something I need to take long to discuss. It's obvious. If I'm Kassad, I'm only looking at this from Nico's POV. And if it's Nico's POV, like, it's all well and good to win Cologne, but you're here to win the major. Like, people know that last major was about Ziwu or Nico better win this fucking major if they want to like end the game on like a high of had one. I was in there with it. So the real problem is, if you're HooXi, relative to who you have, you're doing a pretty good job. You've won 2 of the biggest events. Like, at the end of this year, there are going to be 3 big events, and you won 2 of them. You just didn't win the major. So if I'm HooXi, you're actually overperforming. You're doing a very good job. Like, obviously, by the way, winning events like that justifies staying on at the job and getting a few more months of it. That's all great. The problem is, that's not the stakes Nico's playing at. Nico's playing at the stakes of, like, it's sort of win the major or bust. I mean, the real hard part for Nico in his career, as much as I'm a critic of his, that I'll give him credit for, is a bit like Carrigan, they've always been on that hot seat, mate. The second they lost that Boston Major final, no joke, almost every day of their lives since has been like, you haven't won a major, you haven't won a major, you know what I mean? Like, it's just been that. So, like, the issue I think already that people haven't divided out is, I think it's totally justified if you look from the Nico perspective of like, but is HooXi actually good enough? Like, are they going to win a major? If you do that angle, I think it's fine. Like, I think it's a legitimate question. But like I say, I'll have to assume he's done something, because even if essentially he did nothing, this is a really counterintuitive point to a fan maybe, even if it seems like he did nothing, then that would suggest to me this is a rare team, and there are teams like this. I mean, like, well, sometimes players don't need that much structure, or they don't want input. Like, a quick angle I'll bring up with you here, because it's something you can speculate from knowing the players, mate, is the Nico and Hunter angle. One, I just get the vibe at this point in his career, mate, because he himself is actually a very cerebral player, if people don't know. It's the reason why he never fucking mispositions ever, and he's just had such a long career of not having like really hard, like full-on IGLs. I get the vibe, it's not that Nico can't ever be like, can't have a leader, but I just get the vibe he gets to have his say and do what he wants anyway in all his teams, mate. So already I would assume Nico prefers a bit more of a hands-off approach. And then the other angle that no one ever brings up is the Hunter one, dude. If you ever watch, it looks like Hunter talks quite a lot in their team, mate. Like, I get the vibe personally, because if you remember, before HooXi, you might remember this story, they were talking about maybe Hunter became the IGL, I think, before Lexi B and after next. So that was even something they floated, I think. So I also wonder personally if part of the reason it works is like HooXi calls like a basic loose initial setup. Maybe he has like the basic beginning of the round, and then people like Hunter and Nico sort of get to do what they want to do, which I could see why that would play to what they might like. What do you think on all this?
I get what you mean, and I think there is truth to it. Whenever G2 is playing like a little bit slower play style, you know, when they do exactly what you described, like map control a little bit, take some part of the map, but then see what the trades are happening, and then decisions are being made quite fast. Then in these moments, I'm fairly certain that a man like Nico comes in with a whole lot of talking, and Hunter as well, because they'll be in like opposite parts of the map sometimes. Like, they see, like, together they can piece out whatever the hell is happening. But what I will say, and it's referring to my first point as well, is that HooXi had a couple of like first, second call during Cologne that were great. And I'm talking about extremely fast paced, like decisions made towards the end of the game where, again, we're speculating. It could have been Nico, it could have been Hunter in the freeze time saying, listen, I think we should hit them with the B split immediately. But I will credit the IGL when you take such a risk to play so fast in a round. So some of these rounds, I'm not going to take anything away from HooXi, but I do agree with you that when you have players like Nico and Hunter, that kind of quality, the mid-rounding is much easier. Because not only do you have like good information, but you have probably good decision-making happening around you, and you can just go with the flow. I just wanted to bounce back quickly on the Nico point and see what you think about it. Like, I also think that Nico in himself has played much better in these playoffs of Cologne that I had seen in the past. Like, I even made this tweet, and honestly, I just want to put a disclaimer out there. I am a huge fan of Nico as a player. Like, holy shit, as a rifle, like, greatest rifle we've had in the game, I don't need to be convinced. I am already convinced. But I have pointed out very clearly that there have been multiple finals where he individually had struggled. And it's just right there. It's no, again, we talk about objectivity, subjectivity. I can put the numbers out there. Some of these players where he struggled, and he talked about it on the desk when he came around, and he explained how he was working on trying to keep his nerves and his frustration under control and staying calm. That is also his part of the deal. Like, granted, he has exceptional quality, but we had seen in the past, and that with HooXi, that with Nexa, that with Alexibi, that with Kerrigan, he had moments where he was letting frustration get the best of him, and then he was becoming a free target because he was trying too much and he was putting himself out there in danger and he was dying. This was not the Nico that we saw in Cologne. It was much more measured, much more like refined and controlled, and knowing when to be goddamn aggressive, make the difference. This was like a tweet, like a fine wine that aged so well that you just let it breathe for a few hours and then you just have the bouquet that's coming out. This was the Nico in Cologne. So I think when we're putting all on HooXi for losses or wins, in a way we're discrediting Nico for what he's done as well. Because if the baseline is Nico is so good he should win, then suddenly you're just putting a blanket on all of that he could have done better in the past. And that's a problem, because then you just assume that he was always 100% every single time he's played. And you're taking away from him the respect that he deserves for this Cologne, where he behaved like a true MVP. He was an MVP through and through, mostly in the playoffs. And that Nico right here could have maybe won more trophies with same leaders, with different leaders, because I give him the power of what he did as well. I'm not just saying, oh, well, unfortunately for you, Nico, you had the wrong IGL. You did your best. Good luck next time. No, I give him the credit for what he's done as well. And that, I think, is something that people, Kasad for that matter as well, can sometimes forget. Like, even if you are a fan of a player, I have no problem saying Sayu has to, could do, should do better. Because I also give him then the possibility to do better and to improve. If you just treat someone as a finished product, you rip them away from the possibility to be better. And I think that's detrimental.
Oh, I think also, I mean, obviously in part because of the aforementioned Boston Major, I think Nico also actually was in a similar position to what Zero is now, where the real problem goes like this. When you're as exceptionally and transcendently good as these players are, even though it's a totally unreasonable expectation, by the way, I'm not joking, we expect you to perform every time. Every time, especially, by the way, if it's a big stage. If you're on like a massive stage against other players, like, I mean, I even say it like this, and I want this pressure to be on people's shoulders. I actually hate it, by the way, when like, I mean, the example here would be like what Sun Pius did. I hate it when some rookie walks in. To me, still a rookie, essentially. Like, I use it in the colloquial sense, not the literal sense. To me, essentially, like, if you're someone like a Simple or something, Sun Pius is supposed to be the little rookie that, like, the joke is in the big stage match, I want you to play me then, mate. That's when I've got all my experience. I hate the idea that person walks in and shows you up and they're slapping you around and you look silly. Like, it's supposed to be the other way around in the way the competition works. So, on the Nico angle, I actually think, by the way, it was also quite fair when people criticised Nico like that over the years. I do think there's times where he didn't perform. Like, the joke is, this is why I think this one especially deserves so much praise, because when he won ENCE, I even had a hot take on one of my shows, which was like, I said, oh no, it was a Snake and Banter, you know, where we do the good, the bad and the ugly. I picked it as ugly, Nico winning, because the reason I said it was ugly is because we're all going to do the Dupree, where they go, well done, Nico. you've won Katowice finally. And it's like, bro, that was one of his worst finals in ages. Like, he was pedestrian in that final. It was the others, it was people like Hunter and JKS. They were the ones popping off in that tournament. So, yeah, he won it. But, like, the joke is when we criticised him for not winning, that was when he would have been, like, the absolute MVP and best player. So, the cool thing about him winning Cologne is he checked all the boxes. Like, this is the one where it's actually why, as an aside, because there's one thing I told you I actually like about the idea of us doing the shows, we can get a bit more philosophical. As an aside, the other cool thing I think about the way that Nico has especially won this Cologne is it actually does remind me of how Carrigan had all the success last year. It's like you did actually, like a movie, like sort of absorb all the lessons of your career and all the times you did fail and all the times you did fuck up. And like you say, it's not like actually it wounds you to become worse. This was the masterpiece right here. In the same way as we've all seen those games last year where Carrigan would do like the most insane 30th round call that like anyone in the server can see. Like, that has to be him. If you watch this final that they just played right now, ENCE against G2, first of all, spoiler, I thought ENCE was sort of a sleeper favourite for that final, mate. I know now everyone's going to go, yeah, but the experience. No one knew how G2 would play. They're such a hit and miss team. I personally thought ENCE was going to win that final. And then secondly, the main reason they didn't is Nico. There's other factors as well. Monesi played great and all like that. No, mate, to me, when I watched that game, I told people before, this is the series afterwards. You go and get those POVs that people put on YouTube and you watch all the Nico T-sides. Because some of the stuff he was doing was unbelievable, mate. It's like, it was the highest level of rifling I think I've ever seen. It was, and he did it on all 4 maps in a row. It was unbelievable. So like the joke is, this is why you have to sort of hold these players to a higher standard. Because if we did that, like if we acted like that's what he did at the Katowice one, like, oh, look, you just won the tournament, so you're the best ever. Like, no, these players can do more. So I thought there's 2 angles here. One, there's sort of like I say, to me, I think it's interesting, like philosophically, like if anything, it's actually leveled Nico up all the failures and hardships he's gone through all the years. Like that's why at the end of the game, think how cool this is. At the end of CS:GO, he's at his best ever with the rifle. It's probably the best level of rifle we've ever seen. And then the other angle is this though, which is that's why for me the really tricky part about the HooXi equation to hook it back in goes like this. The analogy would be this, Maniac. Formula One, if people know the sport, you don't have to know much, I'm not a super head, but basically it's obviously massively affected by the tech, right? If you have a better car than someone else, you just have a much better chance of winning the race. So the real problem I think HooXi has goes like this. It's possible he might have the best car in this analogy. So if you have the best car, you're probably supposed to be the champion and you're supposed to probably make a dynasty. So essentially the other problem I think you have on the HooXi equation becomes like how much is enough, basically. Because to me, I mean, the obvious example would be the guy on the server, Snappy. If I was Snappy, mate, if I got that call up during the play break and it was G2 asking me to come, I might love ENCE, but I might also say yes to that. Like that's a lot of IGL's dream, in my opinion, would be the lineup that you get in G2 right now. So what do you think on these 2 angles? How do you resolve that part? 'Cause that's the tricky part, right? Is that in a way he has to win everything, doesn't he?
Yeah, no, definitely. I just quickly, you just wanted to bounce what you mentioned about Nico and like finishing the game and all of this, absorbing all of the mistakes and all. I see the parallel with Simple in Stockholm. That's how I see it.
Oh,
like
right.
The Stockholm run for Simple, same as Nico, is just the absolute perfection. Finally winning the major he needed years to get his hand on, and then he destroys everybody. Just for the side note, I think the parallel is very, very obvious in that one. Just for the HooXi case you're talking about, that really is the issue when we're trying to work with IGLs. Because we assume that they have to be able to make up for some of the inconsistencies of the players of the lineup. That's what we assume. And I think it's a huge assumption. And it's why some IGLs actually earn a whole lot of credit and rep working with players that seem a little bit less talented, because it feels like they have created a system and protocols where they can kind of level off some of these inconsistencies. And because of the Counter-Strike they play, suddenly it works. Now, there is another assumption behind it, which is that Snappy's way of playing Counter-Strike would fit a team like G2.
Oh, for sure.
And that the players would love it and they would all thrive and it would be great. So it's kind of like a multifactorial situation where you have to think, okay, what kind of Counter-Strike does the leader want to play? Everybody buys into it? Great. If they do, then sure, you as a leader have the responsibility to dig some of your players out of silly situations. But there is a limit to that. If HooXi comes to a grand final and Nico, Monesi, and Hunter both shit the bed at the time, he could be the biggest genius in the literal sense of Counter-Strike, and he would not win. That is a reality. On the other hand, you would argue at times he should have a couple of IDs, he should have a couple of moves that just had them come back into the game. So I honestly don't think I have like one final answer to this. I think it's a tricky situation. I think time usually helps you because you see how a team behaves with a player missing, without a player missing. How is he able to piece T sides together, even though Monesi is struggling? I think over time you build that. And unfortunately for him, I don't think he's made a strong case that he can win, compensating for players' inconsistency. I don't think he's made that strong of a case. If you're a detractor of HooXi, if you're someone gunning for his name, this is your angle. This is where you attack. You say, listen, when Monesi isn't hitting 133 or 134 rating or whatever, when Nico isn't being an MVP, he doesn't win.
Yes.
And that's a fair statement. I have nothing to retract to that. It is correct. You're right in your approach. I'm just saying, I don't know that many leaders who in that situation could be able to do it. We see it the same with Kerrigan and FaZe. I think it's a strong example as well. A team that strongly relies on individuals, and when it clicks, there's a couple of rounds where you say, holy shit, that Kerrigan call was amazing. But if Twist doesn't get the multi-kill coming down from Mini into Nuke, he could have had the best idea of his life that still wouldn't have won them Cologne 2022. So you always have to balance it a little bit, and I think we have to be honest in what kind of expectations we set on everybody, not just the IGL.
Yeah, I think another problem you have with the HooXi scenario, because remember, we're only talking about a sample size of 3 tournaments that they've won. Let's be real. We're focusing on the big ones. Is the ones that he's won, like, mate, it's one thing, like, the numbers that his, like, biggest targets, if you had a simple, obviously you'd have similar numbers. If you had a Z, where you get the number. Dude, every time they've won, they've had, like you say, like usually like 2 people compete with each other for the MVP. And then if not, like on a couple of them, you get like some, it could be Hunter, it could be JKS. You just get like a third player just comes along and does like a 1.15 something, 1.2. Like if people don't know, there's people who win events and your MVP is a 1.2 rating. Like that's ridiculous. So I do think already you can see why, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't giving HooXi his credit, because essentially he's got crazy firepower, like so which like very few people have ever had. But here's the one I want to spin it into to ask you, though. This is the tricky question. The reason why I know that there's a lot of the story about HooXi is about the narratives about Cassad and Richard Lewis. The reason why that might sound like a weird thing to say, but the reason why I know that's what's fueling so much of this is because, bro, they didn't invent the idea HooXi might suck. Fans already were saying that ages ago. Like, he's never been some mega respected IGL. So here's the question, right? Which is, everyone right now is acting like, lol, you guys said HooXi sucks. Like, HooXi just won. He's really good. They're all trying to make it a dunk like they. But here's the problem, Maniac. Then you have to go one step further and complete the opinion, because the opinion by that logic would go like this. I think HooXi is a top X IGL. They must think he's really good if they're making fun of Richard Lewis and Cassad. And the logical follow-on should be, bear in mind you just won, by the way, a top 3 tournament of the year. He will win the next major or something like that, right? Like, that's the part I'm a bit confused by, is I feel like people just are using the HooXi thing to, like, dunk on Richard and Cassad. But I don't see anyone doing that. Like, where is the person out there? Here's what's mad, dude. Everyone says that we all craft these hot takes to get attention. Mate, if someone wanted to do like their own version of a Maui, and it could be a pimp if they wanted, and be the guy who I'm the HooXi defender, dude, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of prime real estate right there, mate. If you want to set your camp up and do all these discussions we've just had of like, well, he's won the 2 biggest tournaments, if you do that, you'll have your own unique position. I just don't see anyone doing it. So my question for you is this. Where do you sit on that? Because my problem, I'll put all my cards on the table. Like I say, I can't discredit you. If you do win massive tournaments, like, you got to be doing something right. I'll give you certainly more leeway. I'll give you a chance for the next major. But put it this way, I am a bit of a skeptic. Like, I wouldn't bet on them to win the next major. I have a hard time, as fucked up as it sounds. I actually can't expect to win any tournaments. I know it's possible. This is why I actually feel so torn on this issue, Maniac. Because on the one hand, I'm saying, you've got the greatest lineup imaginable, but I won't pick you to win the tournament. Well, then if they win, haven't they exceeded my expectations? So I'm quite torn on this. Is quite hard, mate.
I think you can have that opinion. And the reason I say that is because I share it. You ask me, how can you bank on them in the future? And my answer is you can't. You can't.
Okay.
That's just a fact. It's a fact. But listen, here's why. First of all, you can both credit and respect what they've done without thinking that it's going to happen again. These two are not inclusive. They're not entangled in any way. We can respect the run in the tournament, and you can respect what HooXi's done in Cologne without saying that it's going to happen again. These two things don't go together. For me, at least, they don't, first of all. Now, the one problem I have, and actually I have 2 angles on that. The first one is some of the conditions that came together in Cologne, I can still qualify as exceptional. Having 3 players above 1.2 rating is still exceptional.
Oh, it's incredible.
Even by G2 standard. even
Yes.
by G2 standard.
Yes.
You can rely on Nico. I think he's reached that level of consistency where I can walk into a tournament, I can stand at the desk, and I can say, yeah, Nico is going to be great. I have no doubt. He's earned it. He's earned it far more than earned it. It's not the same with m0NESY. I think m0NESY is, in a sense, can be at times criminally overrated for his inconsistency. I think he's way more inconsistent than what the eye test mean, because you get so impressed by some of the flicks and some of the, I think sometimes you lose track of, like, I've even, you know what, actually, I'm going to make a quick aside there. One day I'm going to do analysis of the variance of his ratings, and I think I might be able to prove that he has one of the greatest deviation.
Oh, it must be, yes.
I'm fairly sure, but for now I'll be careful. I'll do the numbers first. Anywho, all of these conditions that came together, m0NESY having a fucking Robin to Batman type performance right behind Nico, Hunter being that great again, which he massively struggled for many months as well in G2. These are exceptional conditions over which I have no guarantee going to happen again. That's step one. We don't know if HooXi would be able, in fact, I strongly believe that he would not be able to lead them to a trophy if these conditions were not met or close to that. So that's my first angle. My second angle is we have seen G2 win and then fall off. It has happened already in the past. There was Abu Dhabi, there was Katowice, there was an incredible momentum, there was an incredible confidence. They were destroying everybody. They had, 22 series back-to-back, or 22 maps, I'm not exactly sure which one. I think it was maps. 22 maps, 1 in a row is completely ridiculous. Huge win rate on Nuke and Inferno. We have seen them on the mountain, and they have demonstrated that they can fall off it again. They were not able to capitalize on that momentum. So now they have an opportunity to show us that they've learned from it. Whatever mistake they've done, whatever, I don't know if it was just relaxing or being in their own heads or setting expectations too high. I don't know what happened after they won so much to go back to the struggle some period they've had. But it's happened once. And it's reason enough for me to believe it might happen twice. So the ball is in their court. So these are my two angles.
Actually, the way you phrase it there is also very fair, which is that essentially when they do win, because everyone does snap and have crazy stats, I'm also doing the same thing. I am actually acting like these are the same players you have every tournament. Whereas actually, like the m0NESY one's a very apt one, I think. I do think m0NESY gets overrated because the problem is, one, he does have, this is the reason why everyone makes the comparison, he does have the simple/Kenny-esque, like super addictive fucking like sugar high, snappy style of playing, which everyone, it's like, it is just candy for your eyes, isn't it? Who doesn't like watching that? And the problem with that is you'll get overrated if you do that. Like for me, back in the day, the example of a play was mega overrated. That was Woxic in Mouse Sports. Like, yeah, it was really fucking sick when he did that, but like, it wasn't like it was a super consistent style of play, was it? Like, he could absolutely do that and then just feed and just die a million times and get nothing. But the other thing as well is, it's because of his youth, mate. Like, people have to give this guy a break. He's played like a year and a half, guys.
I know.
Like, a year and a half at the real pro level. And people aren't just going like, mate, if people thought the Z1 one was bad, they're calling this guy as a nickname, the mini goat.
Yeah,
Bro,
you
don't even have a chance out the gate when that's the expectation. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to be even worse than the Z1 one, where all we're going to do is tell you, like, essentially that you're not simple. By the way, the joke is, like, in the same analogy, you might end up being a top 5 player of all time, but your whole life was just like, you're not simple, you're not simple, you're not simple. Why are we doing this? You know what I mean? I think the guy is mega, but like, he's so young in his career that, because essentially to bring it all back, we are all acting like I can bet on him. Like, I agree with you. I can bet on Nico to potentially do this again. I think you can almost flip a coin. m0NESY could just be average. He could be really good next to him. Who knows? Like, to me, that level of consistency takes years to establish. I can't really know that yet. I agree with you. They do, because they do make that sound like that's taken for granted, that every time he's just going to pop off. Because people already, you notice, this is where the hot takes, I am a fan of hot takes, but sometimes they are just like, will you settle down? Because you know some of the hot takes you've seen recently, where they're already trying to do it, Maniac, like, m0NESY's already better than Simple. It's like, will you just fucking give it a minute? He's only just got here. You know what I mean? Like, there's too many of those are working in the background. Also, let's be real. This is where, even though, look, on Twitter, we can all have fun with it, but you guys are getting a bit like fucked up tribal, like political divisions now. Because I even know it's all of you that hate Simple that are doing the m0NESY's better than Simple angle from the Z1 camp. It's like, I can see the political, you know, like who paid for the dossier to be leaked to the press. You know? It's like, I can already see who's pushing these narratives behind the scenes.
And it's so bad for m0NESY. Like, I think you're right in a way. I think it makes him like a disservice. It's a huge disservice that we're treating him with like the same kind of reverence, which is a way I don't think he's earned quite yet. But here's the thing. When I say I believe m0NESY is overrated right now, this is not a dig on him. I value him. I do value m0NESY really high. But I think if today already we are looking at him as a constant MVP candidate for every tournament, we're setting him up for failure.
Yes.
He's not there yet. And he's going to have to live with the wrath of all the fans when he does not meet these extremely ridiculous expectations. Just give him time to warm into this. Give him time to know how to play on a stage when you're not feeling it. Give him time to handle some of the frustration, the pressure of not hitting you a couple of shots. Just give him time. He's obviously got something unique in the wrist. I mean, it doesn't take a master degree to see that he's got some sort of connection with his mouse. What he can do mechanically is just out of this world. He's got it. And he's got good guidance. He's got good people around him. He's got Nico around him, a whole staff. He's got Hunter as well. Yeah, of course he's going to become one of the greatest. Like, he's on track, but he's not there yet. And by putting him there yet, you're not helping him. You are actually against him. You're not helping at all because you're giving ammunitions to people who hate him because then they'll pinpoint all of the tournaments he doesn't show up. And that's going to hurt him. So that's why I'm a very big fan of m0NESY as a player, but I cool it down, I tone it down because I think you got to earn these kind of praises and these kind of accolades, and it takes time.
Yes. And also, I don't think people realize, like, he is 17, he just turned 18, like very recently, but like, he is really young. Like, people don't seem to realize, if you go back and look, right, when they were like his age, if anything, he's actually even ahead of Simple and Zemu. If you go look at how young he actually is to be immediately at the top and then straight into the big prestige event finals, having to carry, etc. So, first of all, for me, he's already way exceeded real expectations. Like, I don't expect him to be Simple. He's bloody 18 years old. Like, but the other angle as well is this is actually even makes me realize why the G2 example of like, this is why I say the POV that you look at it from is what makes it interesting. If you're looking from G2, the org, what should you do with this set of players? HooXi, the IGL, what should you do if you had these pieces? Nico. Another angle I think is really unfair is the m0NESY one, because think about how for two other people's narratives we don't even factor this in. So when you talk about Nico, this is why I hate the idea everyone's bagging on it. Like, what, you think HooXi isn't good enough? Guys, you're the same people who told me Nico sucks because they failed the major. If Nico sucks, surely HooXi sucks by the same logic. You know what I mean? Well, one of the things that people do when they blame Nico for not winning the major goes like this. One, you've won these massive tournaments, so why can't you? Like, it implies your team's good enough. But they also take people like m0NESY, and we do the same thing to him. Because on paper, when in history, in 5 years, when someone looks on Wikipedia, it's going to look like, holy shit, Nico and m0NESY played together. Because that's going to look on Wikipedia in the future like it's Simple and Nico playing together. But he isn't Simple yet. And we are treating it like you're already supposed to just win the major with a guy who, by the way, is a rookie. Like, he's never been in the fucking playoffs of a major. And then the other angle is we're doing the same thing to HooXi, to be fair. When m0NESY pops off, we go like, right, well, that wasn't you anyway. And then he gets no credit. And then if he goes to a major and bombs it with like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid, we go, the fuck, HooXi? You're supposed to just win the major, mate. Like, this is why, if you notice, guys, analysis, this is why it's all about talking. It's fun. What's fun is to unpack the topic. It's very rarely like one super cool answer that blows the whole thing out the water, you know. Like, if anything, I always think it's more interesting to ask the question. That really answers. We're and just now speculating.
Imagine now that you have 6 minutes on the desk to explain this whole conversation. We just had for 40 minutes. Yes. But I have 6 minutes to make it. Yes. So I have to very much choose what I say and the words I say. Because I think we've done a good job at unpacking the G2 situation. But if I'm at the desk in Cologne for 7 minutes, I don't have time to go through all of this. I have to go the shortcuts. And this is why like these kinds of form of contents are really cool to like dig into these narratives, because you can actually kind of untangle it. And I think it does way more justice to the players.
Counterpoints is brought to you in association with eSportsBet, the industry's leading crypto odds matrix. Now, if you've never put crypto onto eSportsBet and made a bet before, you can use our link in the description box below and get a match deposit bonus of 50% up to 100 USDT, so you can get more out of your crypto on the site. Now, if you don't have any crypto, you can also apply to get ESC, which is the rebranded DJT, a token that eSportsBet themselves makes. They have a number of ways you can get some free ESC onto your account, but do not delay. This offer is available only for a limited time. So one thing you can do is you can go and join the eSportsBet Discord, discord.gg/eSportsBet. That will get you 10,000 ESC. You can follow eSportsBet on Twitter, which is @eSportsBet. That will get you 5,000 ESC. And finally, you can follow eSportsBet esportsbet.io, on Instagram. That will also get you 5,000 ESC. How do you claim the ESC, you ask? Well, you go either onto Discord and message the mod mail, or you message customer support on the website. Tell them you did any of the aforementioned things, and they will ensure that you get your bonus ESC, at which point in time you can start making bets and predictions, and you can also convert ESC into USDT. Check out esportsbet.io for more information. Right, here's the big question though. To pivot, we'll ask about the team that's the runner-up now. Right, here's the thing, Maniac. I think the toughest question coming out of this final goes like this. How the fuck do you actually rate ENCE now? I think it's the hardest question in Counter-Strike, mate. Because, like, we get into it now, but, like, on one hand, I actually think I'm overrating them because of this final. Like, I actually think I was on so much fucking opium in that final, bro. Like, low-key, I actually really thought, like, because part of it's the romance of that, if you don't know fans, like, they are this plucky underdog team, like Snappy, you know, his career was supposed to be over. Even people like Son Pius, that was supposed to be a fluke last year. It's supposed to be a one-off, and I'm supposed to hear for you again. So all these things are coming together. So part of me he's really scared that I'm overhyping them and like they'll fall back off and they'll just be like the sixth best team or something. Because low key, at least before that final began, I actually, especially after the Vitality series, bro, part of me actually really does think they're like a top 3 team.
Yeah, in my
you know
book,
what I mean? I can't tell if I'm overrating them. So where are they at for you? Come on.
I was actually thinking about it on the elliptic bike this morning. Actually, just trying to figure out where I stand on ENCE. I believe they're a top 4 team for me right now. Okay. I think I'm ready to put them here. The one thing I did realize, looking at their statements, looking at the results, looking at their events and all, is that they hadn't had yet a truly strong grand final to play up against. That was the first time. If you think about it, what happened in Dallas, they won Dallas, not in a grand final, they won Dallas in the semifinal.
Yes.
That is when they won the event. And that was the moment. They go up against FaZe Clan, it's a semifinal, they're not supposed to win it, the game goes to an incredible, probably one of the best ancient we've ever seen in the history of Counter-Strike. Incredible moments, good callings, good clutches, and they beat their own demons at that moment in the semifinal, and then they completely roll over Mouse in the grand final. There is no conversation, there's no opposition, it's not a real test, they've won it. Now, if you think about Cologne, there are similarities. Like I think the Vitality game is where they actually shed their demons. That's the game. That's the game where Sampaias drops a series that's out of the fucking universe, completely makes Zaiwu looks like a pedestrian at the time. He is the one MVP, and I also think that they have a map pool advantage over a team that's not exactly ready at the time. Vertigo, I'm sure we're going to dive into this a little bit later. Vertigo, obvious weakness of Vitality, obvious problem, structural. We can go down the drain later. But here's the problem, here's the catch. G2 in the grand final is probably their first very big opposition at a moment where all the stakes are high and intense. And I think they were just not ready for it. It took them a map and 3 quarters to start their grand final. Yes. And here is the thing, even though we at the desk, we sell this narrative that it's a marathon, it's a best of 5, it's very unique, it takes a long time. You cannot give G2 a head start of a map and a half, because then they know how to play with the advantage. They know how to play with the pressure that's less on their shoulders. There's just steamroll you, and they can even come back into it. So I think ENCE were not ready to start this grand final as actual sort of contenders to win the titles. I don't think they were ready yet, and that's why they got absolutely wrecked. But I don't see it as such a dig on them. Like I don't see it as such a huge indictment. You know what I mean? Like I think it's still some of the steps that they have to go through to become like literal title contenders for these big grand finals. That's just how I see them. I think it was very likely a learning experience for them to show up and get their ass kicked in map 1, map 2. And I know how it is as a player. You leave map 2 and you're just like, has this grand final even started? Like we haven't even played it. We haven't had the chance. And even though you wake up on Anubis, it's too late. Like there's way too much behind you. You're not coming back from this. They don't have the spine to come back with an 0-2 against G2. I can't see it happen.
Yeah, the other thing about this final to me, this is why I'm sort of joking a bit when I say, like, am I overrating them? I'm not. Basically, what I saw in the other matches was real. Like, it happened. Like, it's not like it was just like they tripped over and won a game against Vitality. Like, they played awesome, like you're saying, in that series. The real issue is, like you say, the context is different in the final. Like, in the final, what you really discovered then, this is why, in my opinion, by the way, semi-finals always beat finals. It's not as simple as there are twice as many of them, so you've got twice as big a chance. It's that when you play a semi, this is the way logically it works, right? In a semi, we're both playing to reach the final. We're not like, no one's like, oh, but if I lose here, I'm top. No, you're just playing. I'm trying to win the tournament. Essentially, it's like this. It's like do your worst. We're both going to try and play awesome, and whoever outplays the other one wins. In a final, you get all those narratives of like, oh, but what happens if I lose and I choke, and like, oh, they're winning. And it's all about like, that's why people can like play not to lose and all that jazz, and it can ruin their game. So to me, I know what you mean. Essentially, this was like the first moment where like, for all we know, in Dallas, if that really had been heroic instead of Mouse, maybe ENCE would have fallen there. Maybe that would have been the big moment, But as you say, the real final spiritually was the semi, and they'd won it. So in some ways, you're buoyed up at that point, and then the better team, the Mouse, and you just get swept along you with the tournament. Yeah, I know what you mean, because basically the problem they have in this team, and this is where the romance of being a small org can't be ignored. The downside of being a small org is essentially you're trying to sort of be like, it'll sound like a harsh analogy, but you're trying to be like the best junk man in the world. You're trying to go out there, and there's pieces like, let's be real, when Sun Pius was available for Movistar Riders, I'm sorry guys, there wasn't a queue on the block of like Team Liquid and Nip. Like there wasn't 50 teams wanted him. There was a few teams, and they were around. And by the way, ENCE was probably the best one. It was people like an ENCE and OG, maybe a Mouse themselves. This is where he was going to end up. So when you take that player, he's not actually supposed to be better than Monacy and Zebu Maniac. Like it's actually amazing if I can get him and sort of get him to a point where he's even competing with him. So the one downside you have is this: one, these players aren't super experienced. Like a lot of them, these are the first finals they're playing their whole career, and we all know a lot of people do take time to acclimatize to a big pressure match. And then secondly, in theory your players aren't as good. Like G2 is a mega stacked lineup, but the thing is, my problem to circle it all back goes like this: because of that, that's actually why I do rate the snappy angle super high. Because I actually do get the vibe, like, if you put almost any other IGL in, I don't think some of these players play like this, mate. Like, they obviously might in certain rounds, but collectively, the way that team plays, it really is a team that I don't look at it and go, wow, what an insane lineup of players. I think it's a very well GM team, especially for, like, the money that we know budget-wise they're working with. But I actually think the craziest thing about that team is it's the way they fit together, and especially, like, Snappy's calling style. Because, dude, I actually think one of the few players I wouldn't diss for the final is Snappy. I actually thought on, like, Map 2, for example, I thought he called a pretty good game. His players just couldn't hit the shots. They really were having a bad time. And then you look at some of his players, right? Here's the problem with the Sun Pius angle. Sun Pius isn't actually better than Zebu, guys. Like, I don't think he is. Like, we're all memeing on that. I know he has this weird thing where he's played in like 5 best of 3s and won every one of them. Maybe it might turn out he has some weird direct head-to-head match. Who the fuck knows? Like, he might be a crypto, but he's obviously not actually better. And the real issue is, it's impossible not to overrate him after that semi-final. Like, that stat, like, is the one that just screams off the page. It can't be real, Maniac. You know, in the semis when he had that stat where he was like 21-3 in openers or whatever.
I know.
Bro, like even real like Prime Simple isn't going to do that. Like that is actually like an impossible to replicate stat. Like he isn't going to do that again. So you already knew he wouldn't be quite as good. And then if anything, I actually think the reason why I give Snappy a lot of props for this run is because if you remember in the semis, it was actually Nertz that was like mad off his game, and then it's like they flipped, and it was Sun Pius who was awesome. And then in the final, Nertz did like everything he could. And then Sun Pius didn't have good. So it's actually, here's the funny thing, to be fair, in how we were doing the HooXi analogy, I'll actually give it up to Snappy. Even though he just made the final and could have won, it's not that every player he had went crazy. Like, by the way, I actually thought also in the final, most of his players let him down. Like, Diha had a really bad final. He knows it, mate. I think he said it on Twitter. He looked like he was really out of the game. This is why it's actually kind of a sad thing. This is, you know, when fans don't get it, this is why analysts hate on upsets, even though this wasn't an enormous upset. Because the difference is, right, there's a world where someone on Vitality can play bad, but they wouldn't have gotten beaten like that against G2. That's the problem. You know what I mean? Like, at a minimum, they would have made it a game. Whereas the problem is, ENCE totally deserved to beat Vitality. But in the final, they look like they themselves knew they weren't going to win this one, mate. Like, there's a point in the game where you can see they're checked out, you know?
No, I'm with you on that. Yeah, a couple things on what you just said. For Snappy first, yeah, I think he deserves a whole lot of credit for multiple reasons. First of all, individually, I was just going down the list in my head of like the actual nowadays leaders, and I think he might just be one of the strongest one individually. For straight up. Like, you're gonna.
He also played great in some of these maps as well, yeah.
Hey, do you remember how he played against Vitality that first map? They win 16-14 when he has like 25 kills, bunch of clutches at the end. Like, he is not only the leader, but he's a main individual reason why they win this first map. If they lose that first map, they lose 0-2, which was, by the way, my guess for the semifinal was either a 2-0 Vitality or a 2-1 ENCE. He was the reason, one of the main reasons why it wasn't the case. So I think individually, he might be criminally underrated. I think he's a very strong IGL. If I'm going to put him in that category and compare him to the rest of the pool, I think he's very strong. Another thing as well, to come onto the Sampaio angle, yes, nobody is putting him in a conversation with Simple, Zaiwu, or even Monesi at the time. I do think he was an incredibly good signing because he has already shown me now that even with some of these like big stage, or let's just say grand final jitters and having to get used to that environment, I think he's already shown way more character than Hades ever had.
Yes.
Very quickly. And yes, that was probably an overrated performance against Vitality. There is no reason to believe it's going to remain at that exceptional level. But some of the demeanor and some of the behavior on that stage, it's just him. That's who he is. And there is a very high chance he's going to maintain. And I think he's going to show up at these
Seems
games.
like a big game player, right?
Exactly. He might have games where he falls off. That's going to happen. But I think he's made of something that just he turns on when he's under the spotlight and he gets to play on the stage. And that's a great attribute. It's a great asset to have as a player. Now, he's not quite there yet. But yeah, what about the rest of the cast of ENCE? Like, I think we're being way too lenient with them. Like, some of other players, the Hunter, the Monesi, the Nico, whatever, we would already be completely dismembering them for these kind of performances. You look at the stat for ENCE the whole tournament. It's basically Sampaio, Nerds a little bit behind, and the rest is just all in the red. Completely in the red.
It's actually shocking. I would say if you're a fan out there and you haven't looked this up, go look up the stats he's talking about. Because you're going to think the opposite. Like I said, you're going to think because an underdog made the final, they must have all maxed out. They didn't. That's actually the craziest part. Like, they actually got almost like the minimum you'd expect possible to get to the final.
And that's why I think Snappy deserves a whole lot of credit. And I think not only Snappy, but probably ENCE. The way I see ENCE is probably one of the teams actually today that does the best at all of the other factors that aren't individual quality. Like, individual quality is inherent to a roster, right? It's the 5 players that you have and how strong they are individually. But all of the other factors that you can go around it, which is obviously strategies, training, however protocols you have as a team, how you prepare for an event, whatever. I think they're probably really, really good at all of these factors. And that's why they get the most out of a lineup that on paper should have no business being in the grand final of Cologne. It's just a reality, and it's not a dig on any of these players. No. But if you put them against lineups like FaZe, even hell, Na'Vi now still has Simple a bit, against Vitality, against G2, it should not be the same category, but they are. And they're doing it repetitively. And by the way, we talk about the Vitality run. They beat Heroic the match before just to be in the semifinal.
Yeah, true.
Very legitimate best of 3-2 as well. 30 rounds on the map 3. So all of these it's not the right word. All of these external things they're doing right. I think a whole of it falls onto Snappy as well. And you have almost no choice but to respect like what he's doing with this roster and what he's been doing for quite a while now. Having players being picked up, you find Spinks, someone comes away and takes Spinks away from you, and then now you have Nerds, and who knows, maybe someone going to be knocking at the door. He's been doing that for quite a while, so yeah, good for Snappy, good for ENCE, but as you said, it's still a young roster, and they were not ready to fight in that grand final. As in, the way a team like Vitality, even though on paper less ready, a less polished Counter-Strike, a worse Counter-Strike, a worse map pool, a team like Vitality would have fought harder in the grand final. That's how I see it.
Right, here's the segue then, because the other thing I think about ENCE that really shows me it's like the org itself and the way the team's set up as part of the structure of like the success is I also think this is why, and we will segue this into the Vitality discussion. I also think the other thing that really impressed me about ENCE is why I even had them as a sleeper favorite in the final. Dude, the map pool looks really good. Like, they've got it mega well-rounded. They can win on all the maps that, like, no one wants to play, basically. And if people don't know, they veto Inferno and just play all the maps everyone hates. Like, that's working for them, bro. Because to segue this, as you alluded to, this is why if you notice, I'll pat myself on the back every now and then. This is why I actually was one of the only people in World Counter-Strike who was like, I'm not that sure about the Flames move. Because, one, he's an inexperienced player. Like, what you're saying, and we're all doing this, is... Right, because you're in theory better than Dupree at the game, if we just drop you in the lineup, Vitality's going to be a better team and they're going to win the tournament, win the mid, all that. That's not for certain. I have to see how he plays when he gets to big matches like this. Like, Flames wasn't in those matches in OG. He was just being chilling as like the best player on a bad team. So there's that angle. And then the other angle is, one of the reasons I've always been very, very like a stickler for the idea of like 5-man lineups. I don't say like, a team, and I don't talk about Fnatic and then talk about over a 4-year span. I talk about the lineup with Pronax, the lineup with Dennis, like specific lineups. Is because I think think people really underestimate that even one player change can change your whole map pool, style, flow of the game. Because there's one thing, Maniac, to segue, that immediately changed about Vitality. Dude, when they won the major, the reason it made sense they won the major is I think they had one of the most complete map pools you'll ever see. They even were punished picking Anubis into people, if people remember. Like, the map that everyone was vetoing at that tournament. Like, they had the whole map pool. They even could win the Vertigos and the Inches of the world if they had to. Now, with the Flames change, there's one thing immediately you saw about Vitality. Look, the rest of the players are still the same players, but the map pool is totally different now. Like, they looked a lot more limited.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And it is the trade-off that I think a lot of people probably didn't think about, which I immediately put on the table when they made that change. I said, long-term, this is a good change.
Yes.
When we look a year from now, you will probably have accomplished more with Flames than you would have with Dupree. I can see it. But in the short term, there is a very, very obvious, not an issue, but an obstacle that they're going to have to address, which is plug in Flames 1-for-1 for Dupree. And certain maps are going to work, and it's going to be fine, and certain maps, it's not going to work at all. And I think we've seen, again, I mentioned Vertigo because it happened twice against G2 and against ENCE. And I think people have to realize something. I'm going to take a time just to explain it. When I say a team suffers from having a 1-to-1 change on the CT side, I'm not only talking about that players on that specific bomb side that is struggling to hold executes. I am talking about the whole logic of how you approach the CT side based on the assumption that you have that a B side is safe. We can do that setup. We can do this. I think the Vertigo game against G2 probably hurt them a lot. And when they moved against ENCE, I feel like the A side was over-forcing duels. They were over-forcing the difference just to try and alleviate the pressure that wouldn't happen on the B side. And that's a systematical problem. That's when you don't, it's like trying to hold like a plate with 5 different glasses and some of the glasses are full and not the one are empty and you're trying to counterbalance the problem. And as at the end of the day, your defense doesn't make sense. So that's some of the problem that they have. I think there are still maps where Flames is going to need time to come into his own on the CT side because Apex has made it clear that he will keep some of these rotating, very impactful CT's positions. He decided that he was going to keep them, which in all fairness, that's his decision. He's been clear about it. Good to you, all the power to you. But that also means that you have to have a Flames that gets used to being sometimes a B anchor on Vertigo, sometimes shitting short on Mirage, for example. That is going to take a while. And that's why I knew Vitality wasn't going to be ready with capital R going into Cologne. Like, if they were going to win it, this was going to be through some crazy individual bravery moment where everything comes together, or you make it to the grand final and then you enter the realm of we're playing a different kind of Counter-Strike now. This is just about, men and just going there, being ready to go to battle. But yeah, short term, of course, it's going to be trade-off. And what I've seen from Vitality was, unfortunately, what I had expected.
Because I think this leads to a really interesting question. This is also one thing I do get a bit annoyed about at the moment in Counter-Strike, is people they sometimes ask the questions, but they don't answer them. Like, here's the obvious question that has to be answered after Cologne. I noticed, like I implied before, it's conspicuous no one was doing this with G2. Like, where are all the people like, right, well, since G2 won that event, I can guarantee they win the next event and the next minute. That should be the logical follow-on. Because the real problem I have right now, if you look at the current landscape, is Vitality isn't the Vitality that won the major. They're this different version with Flames now. Heroic, by the way, it looks weaker than they've looked for a year now or something crazy. Like, they really look like they've dropped off. FaZe Clan, they can be either awesome or completely just non-existent and drop out against anyone. Na'Vi looks really sus. Like, aside from, maybe this new Cloud9 lot people hyped about, like, there isn't even one team that anyone can say is number one. Like, who is number? No. Kassad said it in a way that's a Kassad way of saying it, where he went like, heroic is not top one because no one is top one, which is like, this is why we love you, Kassad, because that doesn't make any sense. Someone logically has to be number one. But, we know what you mean by that. We know what you mean by that. And so, in some ways, that's why we need characters to say things in those ways. So the question is, who is number one? Like, and here's the thing, here's the key context. I don't mean HLTV ranking, or I mean, for real, if someone puts a gun to your head, who are you taking as number one now? Who's your number one? Whew. It's a pretty hard question, I think.
Yes.
There's so many angles you can go with, right?
To be fair, it is a pretty hard question. I would probably still favor Heroic, although that was a catastrophe what happened in Cologne. It's just a question of how much value you put onto this, whatever happened against Astralis. I think that is the main conversation, and I think there's a whole lot more than meets the eye in that Danish derby. Now we've become the big brothers. You are now our smaller brothers, or younger brothers, and I think there was a whole lot of mental game going into this, and they completely fell on that one. I think I would probably still have a heroic. Because if I say G2, that means I'm relying on more of that kind of performances. We've already established we can't really do that. And I think the closest behind the heroic might still be Vitality. And then there's ENCE. To me, that would be, like I said, like 4 teams is heroic, Vitality, G2, ENCE. I cannot tell you right now who is number 1. I do not have an answer that I can back up firmly and tell you this is why that team is the best in the world right now. I don't think there is a case to be made that strongly for teams. I think it depends on what is it that you want to value? What is it that you want to put the emphasis on? And it also strongly relies on what you expect to happen in the next few weeks. Like, yeah, if you tell me G2 is going to play the same, then sure. Yeah, they're best team in the world. Yeah. Now, please show me why they would exactly play like that. I think that's the issue that we have.
Because that's the other problem as well. It's like, in my opinion, the shortlist is obvious. It is, like you say, it's like Vitality, G2, Heroic, maybe ENCE. And then here's the problem. You can put FaZe in, it's just as an outsider at this point in time. They don't consistently go to the final, win the tournament. Like, there's a reason why no one has them as the number 1 team. The real issue is this, is you're just picking a criteria that you boost over the others, I think,
exactly.
to pick this. Because, like, Heroic probably is, on paper, the most well-rounded team, but like I say, I think if anything, they might be getting worse for the choking shit, mate. Like, now, this is why I actually do think, I don't just do this for the show. I did actually, it left a bad taste in my mouth when they won that Blast Maniac, and they sort of were sort of like, lol, we made up for losing the major. I said, no, you didn't though, bro, you know what I mean? Like, look, you did do something. I want to give you props. Like, what it showed is what we all hope, which is you are good enough to win the tournament. But actually, when you win only the Blasts, if anything, it's the opposite implication. It actually implies that, well, then why don't you win the major? Why don't you win kind of ENCE and Cologne and these massive... So that's my problem with the Heroic one. It's like, essentially, if I have to pick a team to make top 8, they're probably my number 1 team. But if I actually have to go in a final,
I know.
If anyone sees me when I do betting, I love fucking betting against this team because they're going to break down so many times. So Heroic's hard. G2 won. It's like what we just said, like, yeah, if everyone pops off, they can win. But it's like, even that shouldn't happen every tournament. Here's the thing. I low-key actually think I probably have to pick Vitality. Because the reason why is this. Even though they definitely have a lot of work to do still on the map pool and integrate Flames, the difference is, and I do think this actually works as an angle, I always say to people, if all factors are equal or comparable, I usually just default to who I actually think has the better star player. Because essentially, like... I know it's a meme because we're going to have this conversation in a future episode, but in general, I can actually rely on Zemu in most of these matches to be the best player. And if you have the best player, plus other fact they have Spinks as an amazing rifler, they have very experienced players. In general, look, they're still a solid team. They're certainly far from bad. And they still take, like, here's a good sign if you're a Vitality fan. It still takes a very good performance to beat Vitality. They don't just, like, bend over themselves and go ahead. Like, they play you in the game. They make it, like, there's a reason why some Pius had to have, like, an absolutely cracked out performance to win that match. Like, it wasn't like he just turned up and put 10 kills on the board. So I think if I have to plump for them, I probably do have to pick Vitality. But as you can see, it's still, this might be one of the most uncertain times ever in Counter-Strike, mate. I'm struggling to find out when there was, this is why the other angle about the HooXi one that drives me a bit crazy is you don't have to agree with all the specifics, but I actually think Richard, when he said that point, like, at the end of last year, was on point, which is, it's just at the top end of the scene. Like, these aren't the teams that history will remember. Like, you know, when G2, like you said, had that run earlier this year where they had the streak at kind of and then right afterwards, Vitality had their streaks and on paper, these are some of the greatest streaks of all time, but I don't know that anyone's really going to have these teams top 10 at the end of CSGO history, if you know what I mean. So it's just at the top end, it's just not like super solidified who's number 1. It's quite interesting though. Like, Gamers8's wide open, right? It's completely wide open, mate.
I agree with you. I think there's 2 angles on that. One angle that I usually do, like a mental gymnastic I usually do, is what team would I, based on a gut feeling, trust in a grand final? That to me is a filter. And at that, I think G2 has a really high score. Whenever I see G2 in a grand final, nowadays with these players, I know that they're ready to put up the fight. Like, they're not just going to roll over. They're not going to let the moment just overtake them and disappear. I know that. I have the same kind of feeling with Vitality. Like, put Vitality in a grand final, I think they'd be ready to have a fight. But another thing that I wanted to say, another angle that I have on Vitality is that even though they're very clearly not a finished product, I think Cologne has already provided some proof of concept for this lineup. Like, how it can look like on the T side, which is an obvious one-to-one plug with Flames, very aggressive in Dupree's shoes. How on a couple of maps, the setups make sense. Like, for example, like the city side of Inferno looks super, super solid. But like Spain's Magicians, I won the A side, as long as Apex and Flames don't get abused. But I think Flames is really ready to get into fights whenever Apex tells him to. So in terms of proof of concept, I've already seen quite good things from Vitality, and I have no reason to believe that the floor is going to get lower at other events. And I think that's why I rate them still very highly, is that I have no reason to believe they're going to just bomb out in group stage next event. I think their floor is really, really high at the moment. And some of the works that they have to do is probably going to be the difference between semi-final, final, trophy. Like, this is the work that they have to do, because not everybody in the scene has ENCE's map pool to go and challenge Vitality and poke where they have weaknesses. Not everybody has that kind of map pool. ENCE for that is a beautiful prime example of what can fuck up Vitality, and that happened. Not everybody has that, so I still have a strong confidence in Vitality to make deep runs at events, even with the roster change on short term.
It's why, to me, like, I teased it there, but in some ways, the way that the Cloud9 story went for IEM Cologne, where like Axel arrives off the plane and plays the quarters, and then even the way they played that quarter Maniac, like the first map was like whatever, but then map 2 was getting like so close to getting really spicy, but then they just lost, so you didn't get to see the map 3, you didn't get to see would they win. Like, in some ways that was like the wrestling tease of like, we're all ready for the big event now. Like, in some ways, like, that teased us extra because it allowed you to believe, if you watch just that one quarter, like maybe they actually could be insane. This could be fucking so. But if we haven't seen the whole event, like if they've actually just had the whole event and be whatever, like, it would have cooled us down. So it essentially, for me, if we pivot and talk a little bit about Gamers8, the Cloud9 angle's a really interesting one, because if you look at the bracket, like, they're right there in one of the sides of the bracket where they can cause some trouble. They're on the ENCE and heroic side of the bracket. Like, that's the one where on paper, if you're ENCE heroic, it's supposed to be easy, it's supposed to just waltz to the semis, but who knows? They're right there. And then also there's the whole topic of like, no one really knows how this team's going to work. Like, you notice there's been a million interviews and there's all these like revealing titles. But here's what's weird, Maniac. This is where like people either don't know what to ask or the players don't know what to tell us, because the question isn't things like, do they like electroNic as an IGL? What I want to know is things like this. Like, is he going to call like he did in Na'Vi? How's that not the number one question everyone asks? Like, every conversation about Na'Vi, Maniac, goes like this, like blade. There is no blade in this equation, but we're all assuming for some reason that electroNic is whoever the caller he was under blade, and that he's going to come into this team and call that way. Because that's the real question I have, is like, I actually look at this team and I wonder myself, like, is the premise to have sort of like a light touch? Like, if you notice, it was implied in that Nafani exit interview, as it were, that like he tried to imply she-rolls and she gets to do whatever he wants in the game. So that's my biggest topic, is just that one, because obviously the reason we're all hyped is the mechanical component looks bonkers, doesn't it? Like, it looks like it could be really sexy. But for me, obviously what will make or break him is the style of Counter-Strike they choose to play. So I know. Like, we haven't seen enough yet. I can't tell from that Vitality series, mate. It was fun on that second map, but I don't know if I'm ready to fully go all in or whether I'm supposed to temper it a bit. Where are you at on the Cloud9 experiment? It's obviously just an experiment at this point.
Yeah, it's an experiment. My hype level is over the moon still. I'm still extremely hyped about the roster. But you're right about one thing, is that we do not know electroNic's identity as a leader. We just don't. And it's something that we had, these roundtables content we did for ESL. And we had this conversation with electroNic. I was at the table as well. And he even said, like, in Na'Vi, that was Blade system. And now I want to do my system.
Right.
And at this moment, I would not be able to tell you what is electroNic's system. Yes. I do not know it. I don't know if he diverges strongly from what Na'Vi was doing. What is it that to be sure, he's got to have to take some of these elements that Na'Vi were applying to like late round situations, the clutching abilities that they were so ahead of so many people at the time. I'm sure he's taking some of it, but we haven't quite seen yet how he defines himself as a leader, right? Now, I was, and I think I still am, one of the strong voices against him being an IGL. I personally think it's infamy to have a player of that quality, of that caliber, getting put into that role. But he seems to have just fully taken on, like, at least what he's saying. Like, it's another thing to see how he's actually going to transpire in the next few months or years. But what he's saying, he seems to be ready to just fully take on the challenge, say, listen, this is what I want to do now. I want to become one of the best leaders in the world. That's what I want to do. It's my goal. Fair play to him. I very selfishly wish it wasn't the case, but that is my wishes. He's living his own life. He can do whatever the hell he wants.
By the way, just to clarify, you obviously mean in your case, you want him to be a plair, but not the IGL.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I think that electroNic, ever since he's been part of Counter-Strike, has been one of the 7, 8 best player we've ever had in the game. All years included, all roles included, all teams included. He would be up there personally in terms of like how high I rate him. And I think it is like a travesty to have this guy being encumbered with roles of being an IGL. Now, the thing is, we have seen in Cologne a couple of moments where he individually would dip because I presume the load on his shoulders is way too high. You have nothing that's pre-prepared. You probably and presumably have to explain everything that you're micromanaging at the time. You have very little protocols or very little code words that you're working with. So your brain is basically overloaded with what is it that you have to organize. I think he suffered from that a lot. I can sustain the idea that with this team getting ready, preparing, having some of these things kind of planned out, he's going to be freed a little bit from it, and we're going to see the actual electroNic play Counter-Strike. I can entertain the idea. I don't think it's a fallacy to think of it. I think it's possible. But I don't even know yet the kind of Counter-Strike he wants to play. And I think that's going to be a huge question. Because in terms of player power or player skill, I think you could even make the argument it's the strongest team in the world. Like if you just,
probably one of the best ever. Let's be real. If you look
just add people. You add Shiro, Axel, and then your worst not leader player is supposed to be Hobbit. Like what the hell are you talking about? And then you have electroNic and Perfecto, whose Perfecto is already delivering with that team. So the components are incredible, like absolutely bonkers. I think I'm gonna just put it out there since it's a podcast. Maybe it's gonna come out earlier enough. I have Cloud9 as a very great sleeper peak in that Gamers8 team.
Okay.
I see them. Maybe it's going to come to bite me in the ass. That's the part of the game. But I see them as very disruptive in this side of the bracket.
One thing I'll throw out there is this. This is like an interesting angle I don't think people have considered. The reason why I found it very interesting, whether it's true or not, that Nafani would try and sort of like on the way out the door make those comments where he sort of tried to imply it wasn't just him making all the calls and that people like Shiro essentially sort of get whatever they want. Now, by the way, there's an obvious reason he'd frame it that way, which is the whole Maui thing was sort of trying to make it like, oh, poor Shiro, it's all Nafani's fault, isn't it? Like, I can see how it's being framed that way. But the reason why I bring it up is this, because when you look at that style, if people don't know the reason why Maui was one of the first people to be super critical of Cloud9 and Nafani is because he just thinks that style of play is too gimmicky, essentially. Like what they did to him is you just sort of sit back on the map. Like people remember how they play. You do really slow approaches where, like, first of all, it actually does look like Nafani calls around himself to be the person who like pushes up to an area and takes a duel, which is a bit weird for an IGL, it's okay. And then when people like Shiro and Axel are in their spots, they do sort of play it like an FPL game. They just jiggle pick the corner a million times till they get the shot they like, and then they play the game. Like if you're a casual fan, what someone like Maui looks at and sees there is it's like, bro, is this even like an approach? Isn't this essentially just let the boys take the duel that works for them and then react off of a kill, which is actually very simple Counter-Strike. Now, the reason why I bring this up is if it is at all true that isn't just like Nafani's system or his way of playing the game, if that's what people like Shiro want, I could see this going both ways. Like, electroNic, this is why I suspect he's not going to do the Na'Vi approach, is one of the reasons why whenever Na'Vi's not good, people are very critical of Blade, is he does try to play, like, in my opinion, sometimes an overly intricate style of Counter-Strike, where he does sort of like, I always say with Blade, he reminds me of that saying we have in English that says, the perfect is the enemy of the good. He tries just to go for, like, he tries to be like Astralis 2018 or whatever. It's like, not every team can be that Blade. Like, I love the idea, the ambition's great, but sometimes you just do some basic ABC Counter-Strike, you win the game, don't you? Whereas Blade always does do the ABC, and we're going to end on Z with 4 seconds left on the clock. Like, everyone knows his style of play. If that indeed is mainly Blade, it's not at all electroNic, then there's a world where either, if you're electroNic, you come in and you play quite loose, but that could be similar to what we had before. Maybe that's what people like Shiro want. Like, because the reason I'm bringing this up for Shiro specifically is Shiro quite clearly is more of a conservative/defensive player Counter-Strike. He's not the super aggro player. So I essentially want to know, like, do you bring structure? Maybe they needed structure. Maybe they actually need you to force them to go into the sites, as it were. I don't know, because that's the other problem with all super teams is normally the problem with a super team is because you have such like an embarrassment of wealth, you have so many potential options. What can sometimes fuck you up is if I have a team, like we'll use the analogy of ENCE. If I have ENCE, it's pretty streamlined, Maniacs. You know exactly what you need from some pies. You know exactly what you need from nerds. Like if I have a super team, who is supposed to do what? Where are they supposed to work? How is electroNic supposed to handle? The problem is, in some ways, the questions almost are more suffocating than the answers we have so far. Like, I could see this being awesome or terrible.
Yeah, I think it can be quite like an intellectual hassle to know how you're going to organize it. A couple of points I would like to bounce on. First, like the comment of Nafani, I just want to put it out there. I think it's when you go out in an interview and you take that angle that you just said, like, you know, it was mostly Shiro, I didn't have a whole lot of space and all. If anything, that's a comment on yourself as a leader as well. It's also pretty much admitting that maybe you just did not have the shoulders to say, hey, listen, like this is not okay what we're doing. I'm not agreeing with what we're doing. This is not working. So let's actually reconsider you cannot just say after the fact that you were a passive bystander what was happening if you were the leader. I think it's a comment on yourself. So hopefully he takes that with him to the next team and works on that. That's step one. Now, you talk about Cloud9's playstyle. My one pet peeve, my one issue with Cloud9 for the long time was that at the highest level of Counter-Strike, you need to be able to have fast rounds here and there.
Yes.
Fast rounds here and there that also helps you gain momentum in games, helps you relax mentally, helps you alleviate the pressure, and gives your leader a little bit of time to breathe. These rounds are important, guys. It's not just about just rushing because rushing is fun. It's like when you are HooXi and when you're Kerrigan, you can see some of these moments where they're winning. Even Apex, they have these fast plays because it hurts your opponent. It gives you a free round. You get to relax a little bit mentally, and you can think about the rest. When you play a slow, shoulder peaky, last 20-second types of Counter-Strike, you burn through your neurons so fast because you have so many decisions that you have to make towards the very end of the round that is unsustainable. So I think that was my problem with Cloud9. It's like, it's about balance. Like, there are rounds in a whole series, there are rounds that you have to play like that because you have the upper hand financially. You know you have the better weaponry. You have them in the corner, so you know they're going to make mistakes. You wait for the mistakes, you punish them. That's great. In certain situations, not in every situation. And I think that's why we saw sometimes Cloud9 just disappear in games because they didn't have these moments that just could help them light a fire. And I fault Nafany for that, sure. And I think electroNic is aware of that. And I don't think he's going to make the same kind of mistake. So that's one take. The other angle as well, to talk about like all of the players that they have and how you need to handle it. Like that has to be a conversation in the team as well. Like to make it clear, what is it that we're valuing? Like, because I think in the way we look at Counter-Strike, like you and I and most pundits as well, we look at it in terms of like, okay, players 1 had this quality, this level, players 2 has this quality, this level, players 3 has this, so that's how they should be playing. We do it player-based. But I would argue when you have a player that strong as Cloud9, you could also do it principle-based, which is, sure, hey, these are the principles that I think we should use to win. And it doesn't really matter if it's Axel who is here in Cave or if it's Hobbit who is over there. I think the principle is correct, and we are all good enough so that we're going to make it. That makes it so like much harder to predict, much harder to see coming, to prepare. But it also assumes that not everyone is going to always pop off and deliver huge stats. I don't think every team can do it because I think it's super demanding on like the quality of communication and the quality of the Counter-Strike you're playing. It's super demanding. But I think if anyone could do it, it would be Cloud9 because they have such quality like coast to coast. You could almost imagine having the perfect, in theory, sort of playstyle because of the pieces that they have.
That's the one thing I've got, like, it's only a mild hot take, but it's in line with yours, actually, which goes like this. I actually do think, though, that if the Cloud9 team works, it should essentially work almost immediately out the gate.
Yep.
Because another concept I think is a bit lost is this. The difference is, when you look at the Na'Vi project, now that is probably the most ambitious project I think I've ever seen in Counter-Strike. Like, the disparate pieces you're bringing together, and not only that, you're trying to blend them all at once. You've already kept Bit and Simple, and they were barely like a core. Like, Bit hasn't even played that many years, guys. So, like, to me, that's an incredibly ambitious project. Like, the languages, the cultures, different playing styles, experience level, like that. Essentially, what you do on that one, that's why in many ways Blade is the ultimate perfect is the enemy, the good guy. Like, he's going for the absolute out here. The Cloud9 one's more like, yeah, there's a few question marks, but if it works, they're all speaking Russian. A bunch of them have played together before. I mean, they've had a couple of different like sets that have played together for years now. They're all, like we say, aside from the electroNic IGL angle, which means he can't essentially, if people don't know, there's no way he can actually do the old school Na'Vi roles and be the IGL. Like, it just wouldn't make sense for the calling. Like, you got to be with the pack some of the time if you're going to be the IGL. Like, you can't really just be on the outskirts of the map. Like, if you think of old school electroNic, like entry on his own, like Ali on Train, like if they played Train, spoiler, he wouldn't be doing that. You know what I mean? Like, that wouldn't be the spot he's in. So aside from that one role aspect, the rest of them, I'm with you. If it works, it's going to work, mate. And this should actually be really good right out the gate. Like, these players are all so good. I always feel like the reason why the super team is so alluring and everyone has to try it, like Kerrigan told me this back in the day. Look, on paper, he already had a really good FaZe Clan team, but the reason he told me I have to say yes if someone offers me Guardian and Olafmeister is because of the what if of like, but what if I am the one who like unlocks them all? So basically, if you look at the players you have here, like I always say it like this, at the top level, beyond literal like language issues where you really are speaking a different language, in some ways, players play intuitively off each other anyway. Like a lot of how you play is like, it just makes sense. It's why you can even see it in sports, dude. You sometimes sign a player and immediately they're awesome. Like the first game, you got chemistry, you're playing off each other, you play the flu ball, like, these players are good enough. There's a real chance that can happen. So I'm with you. Like, I actually think they're a pretty cool, like, sleeper pick. You're right. There's a world where, I mean, you even look at the teams they're going to be playing, like Heroic, Team Liquid, ENCE. Dude, these teams are right there for the taking.
And I think there's another angle as well that is, to me, is super enticing when it comes to Cloud9 as well, is like the authority figure that electroNic can be with players that are still kids. Like, you have to imagine, Axel and Shiro are kids. They're incredibly talented kids. No doubt. They've already been up the charts on HLTV, incredible numbers, incredible talent, that's all. But I think electroNic, and the contrast with Nafany here is huge. Like, it's so stark, you can't ignore it. I think electroNic can actually be the guy to come in and say, listen, like, I know you guys are good, but this is how we win. This is how you win. This is what you got to do now. Like, imagine if you're like electroNic, you've played with Simple most of your career. Of course, you're not just going to go to Shiro and say, oh, listen, I think you should throw that flash. No, it's not about it. Shiro knows the flash. She knows the smokes. It's about having these conversations where you can let him know, hey, how is Simple behaving? How is Simple? What is he thinking? How is he preparing? Like, all of these little things that you can actually learn from. And hopefully he can make them better. And I know it's sort of like a blanket statement that we do sometimes with people like, oh, yeah, this player, NBK is going to make this whole team better. That's great. But in Cloud9, it actually is enticing because you have someone that has been extremely winning, extremely full of trophy, cabinet full of trophy, coming into a roster that has obvious talent, but an obvious lack of these trophies, an obvious lack of these accomplishments. And it's that merging that looks interesting. electroNic with that authority, with that honesty, franc parler, when he's just coming and listen, this is bullshit. I don't know what you're doing here. This is bullshit. Like, this is where you got to do it. That to me is freaking enticing. And I could imagine that in a year from now, that Shiro and Axel could actually be 120% of what they are now, 130% of they are now, if they actually listen to what this guy has to say.
Oh, no, I know what you mean on that one. Like, I will say, this is where, like, let me think how to phrase this best. Put it this way, I do think what you're talking about is like actually a very famous trend in sports, if people don't know. Like, the analogy would be, if I was a teammate, I'll just give you a random example here. If I was someone who used to play in one of those Real Madrid teams with like Ronaldo a few years ago, with the Champions League winners and the best team in the world, etc. If I go now to a team and I'm the veteran player and they have like some young superstar striker, that's exactly what I would be doing the whole time, Minnie. I would just be trying to tell this guy, like, you want to be at the level that guy was at, right? You want to be, like, thought of like him. Like, if you're Shiro, you want to be Simple, essentially. You want to be the next best player in the world. So, essentially, I can tell you how he did it. Like, here's the way he would practice. Here's what he would do in a pre-match routine. Here's what he did when he would lose a first game of a final and how he would bounce back. Or would he, like, play with the team? Or would he take the game? You can give him sort of, like, the cheat codes, essentially. And also, the other reason why I think the electroNic one's interesting is, you can't ignore the elephant in the room that he did have Simple in his team, which is Simple, not only like play-wise, but influence-wise. It's going to have the most crazy like effect. Essentially, it's like a black hole. It's going to be sucking everything through the gravity of it. Every time he's in a room, everything's about Simple. So I also do think people take for granted that, like, if anyone saw, I recently did an interview with Nitro, right? And in it, he makes this really weird comment, which is that he says when he goes back now and looks at old scrims they had in Team Liquid, that he actually thinks even back then, Simple, like, macro feel for the game was like ahead of everyone. And I've actually always had a theory like this, Maniac, which goes like this. When everyone used to say back before Simple was called the GOAT in like 2016, 2017, where he was still like a mega talent and he was like, but he was famously, he was always subdued by like the narrative of like, is he toxic or whatever the fuck, right? This era, if you remember, people actually also used to criticize his play a lot. They used to say like, oh, he's like, you know, he can lose them the game or he's trying too much. Low key, I've actually, even though it sounds like a mad fan angle, I believe it. I actually think Simple, in a way, was always, in some senses, like, it's not that he was ahead. He's always been playing a different version of Counter-Strike than everyone else. And to me, it's more just like, he was trying to play such a different contrasting style that it's only when his skills were like capped out to like a 10 out of 10 that you see how insane it is. Because essentially the joke is, if I'm using the analogy that his skills now were 10 out of 10, when they were a 9.5, yeah, sometimes it did look like, what the fuck's he doing here? Like, what? Isn't that a bit too aggro? But then when he actually did cap out, like, the joke is all of his players become correct, don't they? Yeah. Like, you can't criticize them anymore. You watch them. And it's like, I would if I was telling some Gold Nova player, don't push like that. You're going to get killed, you know, like, they're going to flash you. Like, when he's Simple, it works. Like, so, it's like, eventually, when you get good enough like he is, there are no rules. You are a virtuoso, you get to break them all. But at the same time, to bring it back, if you're trying to IGL the guy who can do that, mate, like, that's a pretty fucking tall order. Like, in some ways, like, it actually could also be a breath of fresh air for electroNic in that regard. Like you're saying, he's coming into a new set of people. And by the way, I'm guessing they also, it looks, let's be real, no one said this publicly, but it looks to me like it wasn't just that Cloud9 kicked him, mate. I got the vibe it was a mutiny in the team, and they all decided, you don't want to find, you've had your time, like, we're kicking you out. You know, we've done a vote, it's 3 against 2 or whatever angle you want to take, and you're out, like someone else is in. So I imagine what you hope there is they're also receptive to a new approach, and they want someone to come in and give them a different style they've never done before, you hope, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And to keep on the comparison with Simple as well, is that there is such a thing, and I think it's undertalked in general, and it's underrated. And of course, when star players pop off, then our attention is drawn to what they're doing, which is very normal. It's very human. Like, we watch what they're doing, we're like, oh shit! Again, Nico in Cologne, Simple in Stockholm. But there is a common factor here as well, and that people sometimes underestimate, is that you have to also have the teammates to make sure that you are getting in these situations where you can have all these multi-kills and you're not getting immediately traded, because electroNic is punishing whoever is about to trade you, because Hunter is punishing who is about to hit you as well, and because they can follow that kind of craziness that you have. If you want to break the rules the way Simple is famous for doing, you also have to have people next to you who are able and thinking quick enough to organize and realize what the hell is happening in a situation and react accordingly. Because if you're playing with Simple and let's just take a stupid example. You're playing Mirage, he jumps out a window out of nowhere, and you get caught off guard and you let him die. He might be Simple, he's going to get 1 kill, he's going to get traded. But if you're quick enough to see what he is doing and then react in the moment, split-second decision, you jump down connector, you fight top mid, suddenly he's not getting traded and he gets a multi-kill. That's so undertalked. Like, people don't realize that. Look what is common to all of these MVP performances that reach high peaks, high teammates as well. Yes. That comes with it too. And now imagine the kind of power you can have at Cloud9 if you allow a guy like Shiro or Exile to go crazy. Imagine like the quality of the homogeneous reaction of what the hell is happening around them because of these. This is where I get excited.
Yes.
Like, if I'm Shiro and if I go crazy and I cross a smoke, I trust Exile to know what he has to do next to him. I trust electroNic, even if it's not in the script. I trust them to know what to do, and that makes them a fucking hella terrifying team to go up against if it clicks.
Oh, I agree. It's mad underrated, essentially, that some players know how to use their teammates as well. Like, I actually thought, I'll give him credit, he actually does know the PR game pretty well. I know everyone thinks Apex is just reacting, like, he's just all crazy. Like, he's also smarter than you guys realise. Like, I noticed when I did my reflections with him, he managed to spin it so that, like, instead of it being like, yeah, Kenny S was God, like, I was sat right next to him, he was insane. It was like, yeah, but it's the way I would set him up to get traded. And then now was he where you started telling him when to go and do it. In a way, it's true, by the way. You do need people like we're talking about, the way you know how to bring the best out of them. But like, this is also actually, by the way, why it's not as simple when the fans think that like there's a superstar like Simple and then everyone else is like a shitter on his team whose job is like, don't get in his way. It's like, if anything, their job is enhance him, like we're talking about. Like, if they're really smart as well, this is why I actually had to explain this to Simple. Like, I even wrote in that open letter years ago where I was like, essentially, you've already capped the game out, mate. You've already got the skill. Like, you're better than some of the players that have already won the major. But your problem is you don't know how to use any of your teammates. They're already known to be like, they've played with these people for years. They like their style. They can collaborate. So I do think that is a factor. That's also why the Cloud9 one is such a sexy angle to me, because like, I also get the vibe when you look at their team, like maybe it will later emerge there were people with big egos and all this stuff. Like, it also does look like for such a skilled project, I actually also get the vibe as well. Like, a lot of those players seem quite quiet, mate. I actually get the vibe this could also work out. Like, it doesn't seem to me like it would be what you worry about. Like, if people don't know, the old phase super team, where it was the one with the Boston Major, there's a reason why that team could never really have played together for like 7 years or something like that. Those are the greatest egos you've ever seen. Like, each of those players was like best player in the world at one point or something, you know. Like, it's not even that you're trying to get in each other's way. Just naturally you've got an ego like that. These players don't seem like that, mate, because the key thing is, even though on paper, like, Shiro is like, I mean, she was better than Simple right now. Like, I've seen him play for the last 2 years. But the difference is, in theory, I hope he doesn't have the ego of Simple, because he hasn't been in the big finals. He hasn't won a fucking major. Like, you hope as well people are actually, like, receptive to that angle. Like we actually have to prove something. Because there's another thing, by the way. The downside of the Cloud9 project that no one's thought about is this. Oh, this is going to be like the HooXi G2 thing all over again. Like, you actually have to win. Like, this is, you can't just fuck around and have a bunch of quarterfinals. Like that'll seem okay for like the first event like this, Maniac. If in like 3 tournaments they're not making the finals or semis, we're all going to be fucking scrutinizing them. They're all going to be under the microscope, right?
And that would be fair. I honestly think it would be fair because of all the factors we've mentioned. Another angle as well that I can bring to the table for having seen them live play is electronic intensity in some of these moments is something out of this world. Like in terms of comm, like the volume and the intensity he reaches at moments where he thinks is key. And like we're talking last 30 seconds, they're about to enter a bomb site and he spots an opponent and he thinks that information just takes precedent on everything else. The level of intensity he brings is out of this universe. So in my mind, I have it as a make or break factor because I don't know if everybody is comfortable playing with that level of intensity and energy in a team, right? I remember when I was a player, that kind of comm would really freeze me. Like it would really make me feel uncomfortable when everyone was screaming around. Like I thought it was really hard for me to like keep making sense and analyzing what the hell is going on in the round. I lose track and suddenly I get it flanked. I think for Cloud9 and some of these players, it's quite new to have someone come in with that intensity. And either they get on board with the program and they learn how to deal with it, or we might see them freeze a little bit. And that's something that I think we should keep an eye on in like the next few events, like see how they behave in like these, whatever, last 20 seconds scenario when there's like a flank happening or something. Because I promise you, he can scream. Like he will scream whenever he feels like it's needed. And that in itself is new. So I'll put it out there as like a make or break factor that we can probably keep an eye on in the next feature.
I will say people probably don't realize because this is maybe because a lot of people on Reddit, if people don't know, it's mainly Americans who use Reddit traditionally. For some reason, there is a classic thing in Counter-Strike where people do make it sound like every player should just be Stewie 2K from back in the day and should be like shouting and like, yo, come on, bro. Like, as you're talking about here, there's a certain type of player, especially certain European countries, don't vibe with that at all, I can tell you right now. Like, spoiler, I mean, it's been implied in the past, but that's the reason why, like, for example, NIP used to make some of their changes. They don't want people shouting and screaming. Like, their style was the opposite, Maniac. They want to be, like, super chilled. And then the idea is like, we take all the pressure off ourselves and we're just playing CS. Like, you know, we're just letting ourselves do what we want. Like, you're right. If it's the right team, because obviously everyone praises the Cadians in the world for this. If it's the right team, people want that intensity. Some don't, though. It's definitely, like, I mean, in English, you say it's horses for courses. Like, depends what personality you've got. Like, I'll be interested to know what side that goes into. That could work. It could be terrible. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll have to see. That's something. So many interesting storylines with this Cloud9 roster. It's like a gold mine for content creation.
Yes.